good morning, everyone. I was going to say good afternoon. It's not afternoon yet. Good morning. Thank you for joining our second episode or second session of our Cybersecurity Summit series. My name is Scott Spatz. I am the president of Cooperative Systems. We are the ones who are putting together this valuable event that can bring a bunch of what we hope to deliver valuable information for you and your businesses. We have a lot of really great speakers lined up for today to inform you about what's going on in the world of risk within businesses, risk reduction strategies, what you can be doing in your businesses to protect yourselves, preparing yourselves for the inevitable incident. So we got a lot of really good content to cover today, and we have a lot of good content to cover in future sessions as well. So with that being said, I'm just going to quickly go over the agenda for today. I'm just doing a quick recap of the event series here now. Talk a little bit about why we're doing this event series, what we aim to hopefully deliver to all of you. And then I'm going to introduce the speakers that we have for today. We have Frederick Scholl, who is the Cybersecurity Program Director of Quinnipiac University. We have Scott Garcia, who is the Professional Services Risk Advisor at Smith Brothers Insurance. We'll take a 15-minute break at about 10:45. And then we have some industry speaker presentations lined up, focusing in the industries of healthcare, manufacturing, and financial services. So we want to talk a little bit more specifically about strategies and things going on in those industries where you can bring some actionable takeaways back to your business. And then we'll wrap up with a Q&A panel. So just want to stress that we would certainly like you all to submit questions via the Q&A panel in the Zoom session today. We want to make this as interactive as possible and answer any questions you guys have about what you're doing in your businesses, what information that we're delivering today, how that relates to your businesses. So certainly any questions that come up throughout the presentations today, submit them in the Q&A panel, and we'll get to all of them at the end of the session. All right, why we're hosting this event. I'm going to go through this quickly because it's kind of a recap of what we talked about back in June when we had our first session. And ultimately why we're hosting this event is we want your business to be safe, protected, and productive. We want you to think about cybersecurity preparedness and cybersecurity strategy in a way you've never thought about it before. And we want to give you tools and resources to do so. Cybersecurity and cybersecurity preparedness is so important in any business that it certainly cannot be ignored, and it needs to be thought about, and you need to strategize in a very structured manner around protecting your business. And our goal here is for you to leave the Cybersecurity Summit feeling differently about IT and cybersecurity. We want to give you some exact steps in protecting your business. Again, planning for the inevitable, the cybersecurity incident, and what you can do, what you need to do when that event or when that incident actually occurs in your business. And now I want to just also mention that we are promoting the fact of creating a talent pipeline for Connecticut businesses. And I'd like to just open it up to Bob DeLisa, the founder of Cooperative Systems, and he is sitting on the board of IAB, and he wants to talk a little bit about that and about what we're doing to promote our next generation of technologists and people who can help protect our businesses going forward. So Bob, take it away.
Thank you, Scott. Good morning. Yeah, I wanted to just put a plug in for the IAB, it's the Industry Advisory Board, and I'm inviting anyone in business or industry that is interested in computer science careers and cybersecurity careers. We're looking for career development opportunities, internships. We're trying to bridge the gap between education and businesses in Connecticut. So through CBIA and ReadyCT, which is a component of CBIA, is the school reach out program. This board is involved in specifically in computer science and cybersecurity at Buckley High School in Hartford. We're doing some really great things. We would love more involvement. We're looking for board members. We're looking to grow our board and get exposure. So any opportunities that we can get from you, we're looking for any kind of reach out. So please send me an email or visit any of the links that are on that slide that is on the screen right now. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Bob. Yeah, really important topic, and we're looking forward to Professor Scholl's presentation today as well, just to talk a little bit about what's going on in the educational space in terms of developing that next generation of technologists, and certainly as it relates to cybersecurity preparedness and just where things are going industry-wise. So again, really important topic, and we're happy to be participating in this going forward here. All right, next, what you will receive from this event, the goal that we're looking to deliver to you. We're having 3 half-day sessions. The first one was in June, obviously today's event, and this is going to be followed up by another event in December. And in December, I'll get into that in a second, but really the goal here is to inform you on the state of the IT industry, how it's affecting you and your business, share some scenarios, what's going on. Today's event, as I mentioned, is going to cover a little bit more industry specific information with our industry breakout or our industry speakers, and trying to really focus in on those 3 industries, healthcare, manufacturing, and financial services, to, again, hopefully give you guys some very relevant and actionable takeaways for your business. December's event is going to be a little bit more solution oriented. So after we've kind of set the stage and talked a little bit about what's going on, talked a little bit more today about industry specific things, talk about our, the development of our next generation of workforce. December's event is going to be more solution oriented, where we want to talk a little bit more about protection strategies and tools and resources that you can implement in your business going forward. So that's going to be the topic for December. But really the goal here is for all 3 events to give you valuable and actionable takeaways, as I've mentioned. The SWOT analysis framework. So for those of you who participated in the event in June, you heard me talk about the SWOT analysis framework and the assessment tool that we presented. These are tools that you can use and work within your businesses to evaluate yourselves and to use the information that comes out of those tools to identify areas that need improvement within your business. So the SWOT analysis framework, the assessment tool that we've provided to you. If you don't, or if you haven't gotten them, if you don't have them, reach out to us and we will get them to you. And all the attendees of this event today, I know we're sending out correspondence around that, but if you do have any questions or don't have the tools or don't have the links to the tools, I should say, please get in touch with us. But these are really important tool sets that you can use to put in some information about your business and get some actionable takeaways from it. So the cyber assessment tool and SWOT analysis, again, we want you to think differently about your cybersecurity strategy. So run the assessment tool, complete the SWOT analysis, and really, again, the goal out of making these events as interactive as possible is we want you to go through that process. And then as you do, and as you get information out of these tools, I'm sure there'll be questions, and we want you to bring those questions up in these events, whether it be today or whether it be at the event in December. So certainly spend some time doing this for yourself and for your business. This is just a little bit about what the cyber assessment tool deliverable will look like. There's just a snippet of some of the information here. So this, you can run the tool on your computer or computers, and it will identify areas of dark web exposure. It'll look at your device itself and identify any endpoint risks in terms of security protections, and it'll look at user accounts and password policies. all that kind of stuff. So it can give you a lot of really good insight and some information into your system itself. The SWOT analysis framework is the tool set that we've developed that allows you to answer a number of statements or rate yourself as it relates to a number of statements that we've provided. And then it will identify based on how you answered those, whether they are a strength, weakness, opportunity, or threat for you. And the deliverable back will be this is a sample of what the deliverable back to you will look like, which again, then you can use to work through these items within your business where there may be any weaknesses or threats. And then from an opportunity perspective, the other thing that we like to always explain is that your cybersecurity preparedness and your risk reduction strategies within your business are opportunities for you. It's a differentiator, it's a marketing component that you can use in your business to market yourselves that, hey, we are very thorough, we are very diligent about our cybersecurity preparedness and about you as our customer. We're protecting your information, your data, the work we do together. We have a highly structured process in place to protect that and to make sure that we're continuing to provide the service or product to you in a secure manner. And not all businesses are doing that. So again, we always look at this from an opportunistic perspective as well, that the better you can structure your preparedness model, that's a marketing opportunity for you and a differentiator from when you're selling your services or your product to your customers. All right, so I talked a little bit about what today's event, the format is, and then December 8th, again, is our next event. That's going to be a little bit more solution oriented. It will be virtual again as well. So that's kind of the next, what to look for next in this event series. All right, so getting to know our speakers. As I mentioned, we have Professor Scholl from Quinnipiac University. Fred's an accomplished global information security risk manager with a unique record of accomplishment in business and technology. He's one of the few people in the cybersecurity industry with business experience from startup to board member and security experience from practitioner to manager. So a lot of really good content we're looking forward to from Professor Scholl here today. And again, to see what's going on in the education space. So looking forward to Fred's presentation. And then followed up by that will be Scott Garcia, who is a professional services risk advisor at locally here, Smith Brothers Insurance, locally in Glastonbury, Connecticut here. Scott's got a passion for educating organizations on business protection and how to prepare for a cyber breach. And his model is he's got a very structured process to go in and do an evaluation with you and your business, risk reduction strategies, obviously insurance being a vehicle for that, but Scott looks at it from a much more holistic perspective than just insurance. So again, also really looking forward to Scott's presentation and some things that he's seeing when he's working with area businesses as well. So that being said, Professor Scholl, I'll hand it over to you, and if you want to get started, and then we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Scott. So I just need to share my screen. Let's see, this will stop other screen sharing. I have this. And is that working?
Yep, we're good to go.
Wonderful. Yes. Thanks, Scott, for the introduction, and welcome to this seminar and presentation. I'm very excited about it. I thought the program that Scott and others put together was very timely, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of the speakers. So as Scott said, I am in academia. I'm the director of the academic program in cybersecurity at Quinnipiac, but we really like to keep one eye on what's going on in the cybersecurity industry, and also what's going on with respect to students and enrollment needs and things like that. We have to kind of match both up. We can't teach material that's not being used by industry. So I appreciate even being part of this program. So the topic I picked is called See Yourself in Cyber. And if you've looked ahead a few days, this is the theme of next month's National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I think the federal government has been doing this for 15 or 20 years. And this one kind of caught my attention, see yourself in cyber. So on the one hand, I'm not sure exactly what that means. It could mean different things. But on the other hand, it's nice because you can interpret it in different ways. So that's kind of the theme of what I want to talk about, and we'll get into that in a little more detail. So let's see if I can advance my slides here. Okay, let's see, is that working? Yep. So you guys already know about me. I will quickly go over that. And then I want to talk a little about the Quinnipiac Cybersecurity degree program. Hopefully it reflects what's going on in industry. And then I wanted to, then another kind of a sub theme of this, or the way I interpret that CISA DHS, see yourself in cyber, is really connecting cybersecurity with the business. So I want to talk about that, and then have a few proactive tips for staying secure, and then kind of some conclusions and hopefully takeaways that will lead into the details that the other domain-specific speakers will cover. So I am the Master's Program Director at Quinnipiac. I did manage security for 3 years at Nissan Americas. So I was in the trenches, and I think that was a really valuable experience as being part of a global company. Subsequently, I've also consulted for financial services firms and healthcare firms. So, and I started a previous master's degree cyber program at Lipscomb University in Nashville. And even going back further than that, I did 2 startups in data communications. And an unknown fact about me, I'm a big country music fan. So I enjoyed my 11 years in Nashville. So just a little bit about our master's degree program. And as I said, it was put together, I put it together 4 years ago when I came here, and tried to include materials that would be relevant for actual practitioners. So it is 30 credits, it's 100% asynchronous online, and it is for working professionals. And again, it is a master's degree. A couple of years ago, we opened it up to some of our undergraduates in the 4+1 program, so they can start taking graduate courses as undergraduates, and then with only 1 calendar year after they get their bachelor's degree, they can obtain a master's. And then even the newest program we have for really top high school students, they can get a bachelor's degree in 3 years and then the master's degree in 1 more year. And these are so far students in computer science or software engineering that are on that track. And the focus areas that we emphasized in the program, it's a cyber defense program. We are applying right now for our DHS NSA Center of Academic Excellence accreditation. And you have to have your program running for at least 3 years to do that. So when we got to that point last fall, we did start the application process, and I have to send in the final evidence for that this afternoon. So, but anyway, the focus areas for the program are risk management, security policy, and then security technology. We include things like network security, cryptography, operating system security. We have 3 courses on data security, IoT devices, non-relational databases, traditional relational databases. We have 3 credits on how to program securely and how to use programming skills to automate things and do data analysis. Then we have 3 credits on web application security. And I think we're one of the few programs that teaches identity and access management, which is so critical these days. We have 3 credits specifically on cloud security. We cover AWS and Azure. And then we have 3 credits on building, operating, and testing resilient systems. And then a capstone project is also required by everybody. And most recently, we've been adding in some electives in specific domains, and they kind of align pretty nicely with the topics that are being covered here. So in this seminar, so we have 3 credits planned on healthcare cybersecurity, 3 credits planned on cybersecurity in fintech. If you followed that industry, both of these industries are just exploding with creativity and new services and new options and new risks as well. And then we finally got around to including a pen test 3-credit-hour course. And then we have talked about, we don't have a manufacturing cybersecurity education or elective track yet, but we want to do that. And we're supported in, we got a small grant from the state of Connecticut, a Tech Talent Accelerator grant. And as part of that, we're looking for more industry partners in each one of these areas. So if you're in industry and want to provide us advice and counsel on what exactly this content should look like in any of these domains, healthcare, fintech, pen testing, or manufacturing, you know, I have my email at the end of the talk. Just send me an email. I'd be happy to talk to you. So security plus business. So see yourself in cyber. So what is this? This is how the how CISA, the federal government, interprets this. So they're saying individuals and consumers can take basic security actions. Okay. Then they're talking about vendors. Secure yourself because you're all part of a supply chain. And by maintaining security, you can help prevent supply chain disruptions. And then, of course, the other part of it is see yourself in cyber means if you're not in the field, you may want to take some of our courses or other courses or get a cert or figure out how to get into the field. There's so much opportunity there. And then the other part of this, according to Cybersecurity Awareness Month, they highlight 4 proactive security measures. And some of these have been seen before, but I think there's always something new to address in each one of these things. So these are the 4 things that you can do in your organization or at home. You set up multi-factor, and multi-factor's there. You just have to take the time to set it up for all of your critical accounts. Strong passwords, recognize phishing, and then update software. And so I'm going to talk about all of these, kind of our viewpoint on each one of these things. So first, I start with the evolution of cybersecurity. I've been around long enough that I've seen a lot of change, and it's pretty interesting. So I remember the mainframe era, which I'm going to put as like 1965 to 1980, where we didn't have that many worries, right? We didn't have any cybersecurity worries. We'd, like this guy here, we'd just go forage for bananas, and that was about it. And then in 1980, Bob Metcalf invented Ethernet, and that kind of changed everything. Now computers are networked together in an insecure, what proved to be an insecure way. So from 1980 to 95, we had some breaches, some malware being distributed by floppy disks or other means. It wasn't a disaster, but we started to wake up to, hey, there could be a problem with this interconnectivity. And then in 95, things really started to take off. One, that was when Windows 95 first incorporated a TCP/IP stack. I don't know if anybody can believe it. The first version, I just looked it up, didn't have a TCP/IP stack, but it got added in pretty quickly, along with a default Internet Explorer browser. And then 95 was the year when Netscape came out, Internet cookies were developed, SSL was invented. So after that, this huge growth in internet commerce came along, and security professionals started to emerge. We started to get some basic tools, some basic intrusion detection and firewall technologies. So we're kind of like this guy here in the middle with the club. And then later, I just arbitrarily put this next era from, the eras got smaller, right? Time kind of got accelerated from 2005 to 2015. We had a huge growth in the number of security tools that are out there. So, and they got better. We got spears and more effective tools. And then up to now, in 2022, I was just checking, we have about 2,600 security vendors. And so I think we're pretty well protected in many ways, right? Like this guy in the armor, I'm not sure we can see where we're going, but we do have good protection. We have swords that are pretty sharp. And so we've gotten into this model where VCs are funding new product features as standalone companies, and then they get acquired by other larger security companies. So that's the way that the industry is growing. I think it's possible to get too tech focused and kind of lose track of what we're trying to protect. So my hope is that in the future, we have more of a business focus for security, because ultimately we're just securing the business assets and business processes. So that's why I thought kind of here's where we are now, and hopefully we can get away from total tech infatuation or whatever, and spend additional time on really securing the business. And I ran across a very good blog post. Actually, it came out last week. I just saw it yesterday, by Helen Patton of Cisco Systems, and it's you can see the referral, the reference there, hpatton.medium.com, and she's talking about aligning security with the business. And I don't feel bad copying what she said, because I've been talking about this for years. And she had an interesting point, though. Her point is that less security is better security. And I thought that was really worth sharing. So I included here, and I definitely recommend everybody read that blog post. So why is less security better security? It seems at first glance that's not going to be true. So here are the steps that she has to sort of support that statement. First, she says you need to understand what is the business doing. And it's so easy not to do that. You know, if you're working for the CIO, possibly, and you're in a security operations role or something, you may not get a lot of opportunity to understand, how does this business make money, and what are the flow of processes and people and customers. So that's step one, understand what is the business, because that's what you're securing in the first place. And then the next thing is understand, what does your company value, because you have to speak that language. So if you're McDonald's, you're probably valuing speed of flipping burgers, right? How many burgers per hour can be flipped? But if you're In-N-Out Burger or some of these other burger chains that value kind of fresh ingredients and things like that, you're probably less focused on that. You're probably more focused on the supply chain to make sure you get those ingredients. And then third, you do need to understand how the company works. What are the processes? What are the supply chains? And you need a mental, if not a actual physical diagram of what that looks like, because that's basically what you're protecting. And then the fourth thing is, and I thought this is good, you need to be able to tell the security story. And you need to tell it to different people. So she mentions telling the security story to marketing and sales, give them an opportunity to go out and include security in the product pitches and product marketing literature and things like that. I think that's one good point. And then another one that's equally important is tell the security story to the business teams and help them develop skills so they can be good risk practitioners. I mean, in the past, what we've tended to do is we have our annual security awareness training, and the business people watch that, and then they go away and they forget about security until the next year's training. So she's really talking about have a continuous dialogue with the business people so that they understand their responsibilities and roles in keeping the system secure or keeping the organization secure. And then the next to the last bullet point is understand how does your organization do budgeting and finance, because you need to get the program, your security program financed, or you need to make sure that executives understand that not funding something is itself a cybersecurity risk. In fact, I remember reading a book on this years ago where this CISO listed security risks. And I remember you got things like malware, phishing, but the top risk was not enough funding for the security program, which is certainly true. So then the last point that she made, and what she means by this, is spend less time doing security and more time helping the business be successful. So do you need to set up new security tools? Maybe you don't. Maybe there are easier ways to help the business be successful. And I was just in a kind of a conference call last night with a group. I've joined a group called SIM, Society for Information Management. There is a chapter in Hartford. I went to the meeting in Fairfield, Westchester, which meets down in Stamford and around there. And there was a conversation about, what can we do to protect the business? What new tools do we need? And there was one guy who was a CIO, and he made an interesting comment. He said, look, guys, rather than adding in all these additional tools, he said his strategy was to help the business avoid risks. So for example, he used whitelist applications. Okay, that's not as easy, that's not easy to do, but you need, you sort of make sure the business runs only the applications that they need, so you can avoid that risk. Then he also had a policy on no personal computers on the network. You had to have a company issued computer. So certain risks can be avoided, and in that way the business can be you can make, focus on helping the business and figuring out how to do that, and less time on just being in the security silo. So I really liked what she had to say. So take a look at that. And this brings up something else called the 3 lines model, or 3 lines of defense model. And this is sort of a theoretical type of model for security. Obviously, it has its roots obviously in castles and moats and things like that. I show a diagram over here so everybody can relate to that. If you want to be protected in security or in a castle, if you own one, you need to have things like moats, multiple firewalls, multiple perimeter walls, and internal places where your soldiers can be firing arrows or muskets or whatever at attackers. So that's kind of the multiple lines of defense. And in this particular model, the 3 lines model, it's more of a governance model. And it isn't, if you're in a small organization, you're not going to have 3 distinct lines. If you're in a large organization, you will have 3 separate lines. In smaller organizations, the lines are going to be blended, but it's helpful to understand what are the lines of defense in cybersecurity from a governance point of view. And the interesting thing is that the first line includes business managers and part of the security operations, like your SOC. And I remember when I was managing security for the car company in Tennessee, it's not easy to get the business managers to recognize that they're in the first line. I remember going with my CIO to a senior vice president, and I said, we have these risks that need to be addressed. And I remember his answer was, well, Brett, I don't want to know about those, just go fix them. So it's hard to get the business managers to be part of this, but they are the first line of defense and security. And then the second line includes risk and compliance professionals and your CISO. So that's where The CISO function lives. The third line of defense is internal audit, or you might have external auditors as well. And then the fourth line would be the board of directors. So it's sort of it's a concept for security governance, and it's worth learning about it. And at the bottom here, I have a reference. This is the best reference I've seen on LinkedIn, a short article on how does this work. And one of the challenges that annoys me is this model was developed by the Institute of Internal Auditors, the IIA.org. And they, in order to read about the model and understand it, you have to become a member. So it's a little bit, and that's not cheap. So it's a little bit tough to figure it out. But this guy wrote a good article. The basics are understandable from the castle and moat analogy. The details of who's in which line, you know, you need to sort of read Jerry Perullo's article. So back to, these are some of the approaches I've used to know the business. So this guy, Michael Porter's a Harvard Business School professor. He came up with something called a value chain. And he says every business is adding value to something. And if you're looking at the business, you can use this kind of a model to understand what the heck are we actually doing. So there's some inbound products or raw materials that are coming in. They're going through an operations phase. Then there's an outbound logistics or shipping. Hopefully the rail strike has been averted, so we'll have outbound logistics. There's marketing and sales, and then there's post-purchase, you know, there's customer service. And so he talks about what's supporting that. You've got the firm infrastructure. You've got HR, human resource management, technology development, new product development, and then purchasing, procurement. For the car company I worked at, procurement was really at the top. It was the key. Everything was procurement because that was the cost of raw materials that went into the car. So procurement basically ran the company. But every company is going to be a little different. And its value, it's understanding the value chain is super critical. What exactly is your company selling? Why are they in business? And that's what you need to protect. So the better you can articulate that, the more effective you'll be, I think. And then this diagram is a little hard to read, but it's basically suggesting that you need to figure out what different business functions do you have. The business processes are the second row here. From acquiring customers, IT does messaging, storaging, and compute services. HR, there are many processes, but onboarding, offboarding are one. And then those processes are supported by applications, which are supported by systems, which are supported by hardware, which might be in the cloud, and infrastructure. And so this is basically the CIS top 20 controls, number 1 and 2, right? Understand your hardware and understand your software. And these are the two. And this diagram is just saying, understand how they're connected. And even a small business should have a one-page diagram that shows this, because the key, one of the keys that it just comes up over and over again in security is understanding what your assets are. If you don't understand what your assets are, how they're connected, and how they support the business, you're never going to defend it. So all this is a fancy way of doing CIS controls 1 and 2. So I'm going to look, I guess I have 15 minutes, I'll go a little faster. So one area that is critical is vulnerability management. And I'm not working in that field, but I talk to people who are. And it's a really challenging area. And so my suggestion is to align the vulnerability management process more closely to the business function. So let's see what's going on here. So in the area of just NVD, CVE vulnerabilities, this is kind of the growth. And we're up to the estimate. My estimate is we're going to have about 25 or 26,000 vulnerabilities this year in 2022. And worse is the number of cumulative vulnerabilities, because these vulnerabilities didn't go away. You know, as we know, we have to, for PCI and other compliance standards, we have to resolve critical vulnerabilities. But what about all the other ones, the low and medium vulnerabilities that are still out there? So this is the cumulative number that are there. And I did a little bit of curve fitting, and my estimate is we're going to have 400,000 total vulnerabilities by 2027. And so I was kind of wondering about that. What's going on here? Are we that bad at software development? But then I looked at one specific little market, the IoT healthcare market, which I was interested in, and it fit exactly the same growth curve. So my conclusion is the explosion in vulnerabilities is not because we're getting worse at developing software. It's just that we're developing so much software and so many new releases are coming out. So it's the growth in digitization and digital transformation that is a real threat to security. So at least my recommended solution is to build a more business-focused remediation plan. So everybody starts with the CVSS base score, but then you can move to a more of a common sense scoring algorithm, understanding how critical is the asset. The vulnerability is going to be associated with a certain asset. How critical is that to the business? Is there an active exploit? And is it exposed to the internet? So that would be kind of phase 2. Phase 3, build your remediation plan based on risk scenarios. What can go wrong in your business? And you can get that information from past breaches or research. What are the types of attacks that could bring down your business, and which assets would be involved in that? So that's a better alignment with the business. Then I just have a few other proactive tips that were addressing some of the things that the National Cybersecurity Month recommendations were. So one, recognizing phishing. And there's different ways you can do it, right? You can say, like the Reagan statement, trust but verify, right? That I looked that up, that went back to 1987. That doesn't really work anymore, right? You can't trust and then verify. By that time you could be hacked. So I like the way Paul Asadorian turns it around. He says verify and then trust. I think that's really good. So you've got to look at, where is the email coming from? How can I verify? I just spoke to our CISO at Quinnipiac because I'm getting some, like I get resumes from students that might be abroad. And I spoke to him, I said, how do I verify that these things are legitimate, that these PDFs are real resumes and not malware? And he said, well, yeah, I can upload to VirusTotal, okay, but even that doesn't work. PDFs can still contain malware and not be vetted. So then he said, I send it to him and he'll explode it in a sandbox or something. So depending on the risk, verify but trust, I think, is a really good suggestion. I'd like to think you could use zero trust, don't trust anybody, but that kind of brings commerce to a halt. So I think this is a really good one. And my other thinking on recognizing phishing, we all say, look at links and look at the origin email. But another thing to focus on is, what are the scams that are being practiced? Is this email promoting one of these scams? And some very common scams carried out by email or business email, compromised email account takeover, investment fraud, confidence fraud or romance fraud, and then tech support fraud. So when you look at the email, you can think, is it any of these categories? And I took the FBI IC3 data and organized it in a little bit different way. In terms of, on the left-hand column, it's loss per incident. FBI IC3 reports annually on breach and cybersecurity incidents, mainly against individuals. And then on the right-hand horizontal axis, the relative likelihood. So here you can see what are in terms of loss per incident, the biggest thing is this business email compromise. Then number 8 is investment fraud. And number 6 is confidence fraud or romance fraud. 9, tech support, and then 10 is down at spoofing. So these are the things, and there are others though. If you're in a different group, depending on what type of business your company is, you should probably do an awareness training bulletin around that. So I noticed that students were being subject to loan forgiveness fraud, right? Biden announced student loan forgiveness to certain people. And so now there are fraudulent emails being sent about that. So this industry is constantly, the bad guys are constantly upping and changing their game. So interesting, I have music in this slide, which I can't stop. So it stopped. So this is my one. Business email compromise is something that you figure it can't happen to you, but it does. And this is one, it's a little bit old. It's probably 6 or 8 years ago. It was a company called Squolar in the Midwest, a trading firm. And they lost $15 million through a business email compromise. And the reason I put this up is that there was a very detailed analysis that was posted on how did this happen. And the way it happened is there was a hacker gang that targeted the controller of the company, Kevin McMurtry. They also they spoofed the outside attorney of the company who worked for KPMG, and they spoofed the CEO of the company, Chuck Elsey. And so what they did is they sent fake emails from the CEO to the controller that was affirmed by the outside attorney. And the message was, we have to send $15 million to the Bank of China because we're buying a new affiliate in Asia. And this guy, and it was incredibly clever and very, very, very well done. And he did send the $15 million. The company's still in business, but these people are no longer there. The lawyer is still at KPMG, as far as I know. So these things do happen. Okay, so that's business email. So for MFA, there's so many choices now, right? Some people, security professionals, like to say SMS is no good, but SMS is way better than nothing. You also have authenticators to choose from, push notification, and you even have Yubico keys if you want to be extra secure. Strong passwords. I have kind of personally given up trying to pick a password phrase, or like Mary had a little lamb or something like that. So I just use a password manager and a random password generator. I keep one random master password. And you can use this site, passwordmonster.com, to test the strength of the password. So just for fun, I tested the strength of 4, 6, 8, and 12 random passwords generated by LastPass. And so you can see what happens here. If you get up to 8 or 12 characters, you're probably pretty safe, even if the password testing algorithm is off by a factor of 100, or it could even be off by 1,000, and you'd still be pretty safe with 10 or 12 character passwords. So simplify your life. Use a password manager and a random password generator. That's my recommendation. And then I think, at least from my point of view, the biggest security control, the best security control, is continuous improvement. If I was doing a risk assessment for a company and it had maintained its same level of security maturity for the last 2 or 3 years versus a company that showed measurable improvement year over year, I personally would rank the latter company as being more secure, because it means the organization's culture is behind improving security. If you just have a static security profile, then I would argue that that's probably not that realistic. And under the hood, there are a lot of things that aren't being done right. So So how do you improve security maturity? Just a couple of pointers. Establish more business focus, do more with less. So you can do more with the resources that you have, following some of the ideas in Helen Patton's article. Distinguish signals from noise. How do you figure out what you really have to focus on? Are you collecting the right information, and is it overwhelming the security analysts you have? And bullet point 3, don't repeat past incidents. You have to learn from the past. We can't make the same mistakes over and over again. And then I see more automated tools. I just ran across an automated pen testing tool using artificial intelligence. And it's clear that these tools, even though every security vendor is saying that they have artificial intelligence, it's clear that these tools are going to be effective. So we have to figure out which ones are and where to use them. And then in terms of learning from the past, just note the Cyber Safety Review Board got started last year. It's only issued one report so far, July 2022. But I think it's basically the mission here is to say, look, we're not going to keep making the same mistakes. And there are a lot of really good recommendations on improving open source security in there. And I think some of them will be implemented. And then you've got, government regulators are trying to do more. The SEC's new rule says you have 4 days to report a material cybersecurity incident. So I think that will improve security maturity at least public companies. And then I just have sort of a couple of tips. I finally figured out how to use Twitter effectively, and hopefully it'll still be around, unless Elon Musk totally wrecks the company. So what I did is I set up, my problem is in the academic space, I need to figure out what's this world of security strategy, what's happening, what's coming down the pike in the future, because it's going to take me a year or two to set up a new course to teach that. So I finally put together a list of kind of thought leaders in security, put it on Twitter. So every day I can check this and see what's going on, at least at a strategy level. I don't see the latest indicator of compromise, but I see sort of what these thought leaders are saying. And so you can put together a list of your own to try to do a real-time read on what's happening in security. And then another book that this is the book I wish I had written or could write, by Neil Deswani at Stanford. So it's a book really going into detail on breaches that have taken place recently. And so I highly recommend reading this and sort of understanding what went wrong there. And is that something that could go wrong in your organization? So we have to learn. We can't keep reinventing the wheel. We have to, keep up with trends, and we have to also learn from the past. And I think that's it. So thank you for attending. I hope people got something out of this. I hope it somewhat sets the table for the next talks. I'm really looking forward to them as well. So, and do I have my contact information on here? Yes, so there's my so if you do want to be part of any of those industry initiatives around healthcare, manufacturing, or finance, or security operations and pen testing, send me an email, or if you have other questions or want other information, you can reach out to me via email. All
right, great. Thank you very much, Fred. A lot of really good information, and certainly along the theme that we've been talking about with the, looking at your preparedness from a holistic perspective and from a strategic perspective. A lot of good insight there, as well as some of the technical controls and more specific technical protection measures that you can implement in your business. So thank you very much, Fred. Appreciate your presentation. We will now transition over to Scott Garcia, again from Smith Brothers Insurance. He's a professional services risk advisor. So Scott, take it away.
All right, fantastic. Great presentation, Fred. Great information. Let's share the screen here. All right, can everybody see my screen? Good.
Yep, good to go.
Fantastic. All right. So my name is Scott Garcia. I'm a risk advisor with Smith Brothers Insurance. I help our clients manage risk, specifically in the cyber realm. So there's 4 points that I'd really like to discuss today. The first one is changes in the industry, what we're seeing, how the industry is changing. What are the two major claim trends that's happening within the insurance industry? Top 5 controls that I would highly recommend, and almost every carrier is looking for companies to have implemented within their organizations. And then the final topic will be about cyber risk management and what are some of the strategies that you can implement to help secure your business from a cyber threat. So with the industry changes, the cyber exposure shifted dramatically when COVID hit. Pre-COVID, really what we are most interested and most concerned about is the amount of data that we've collected and the type of data that we collected, whether it was health information, personal identifiable, corporate, financial, anything that was non-public. We were concerned about somebody obtaining this information and then monetizing it, mostly on the dark web. So they would take it, sell it on the dark web, and then we'd be sitting there trying to figure out how are we going to not have a public relations disaster and go through the whole recovery process. But when COVID hit, the criminals shifted their tactics, and they really went from stealing our information to denying access to the information, either through ransomware or through extortion. And what they realized is that the workforce got pushed out of the protected network environment, and everybody was working remotely. So what they would do is just scan, looking for these remote access points, remote desktop protocols, VPNs, those types of things, and they would brute force their way in, and they would launch the ransomware, and they were going right after the victims themselves. They found that this was a lot more, it was easier to do, and it was more fruitful at the same time. And then to build on top of that, they realized that the insurance product was also paying these ransoms. So pre-COVID, typical ransom was about 5 to 20,000. It was really the business interruption and the legal fees and the forensics that was much more impactful than the actual ransom themselves. But when they figured out that the insurance products were paying the ransom, typical ransom in 2020, 2021 was about 250,000. Then you pile on the business interruption, the forensics, the legal expenses, you're looking at a very significant event, typically between $5 and $1 million, really. So they've really shifted their tactics to this thing, and we've had to shift our risk management strategies at the same time. So with all these claims coming in, it created volatility within the cyber insurance market as well. And it really went into chaos. Pre-COVID, capacity within the market was huge. Everybody, all the carriers were really hungry for the business. They were fighting competitively for the pricing. The pricing was deeply discounted. The actuarials didn't really have the numbers and the claims to figure out where these where this pricing should be. But once all the claims really started to pile in pre-COVID through ransomware, the reserves are now being tested. A lot of the players that were late to the game, we see them drop off. And then a lot of the carriers that we were reliant upon really became undesirable markets as well through exclusions and endorsements that they added onto their policies. And that was really the standard market. But one of the good things that came out of it are insurtechs, and insurtechs utilize technology, one, to streamline their business, but secondly, they use it as part of the underwriting process. So what they do is they're very proactive. They run scans across your network. They're looking for vulnerabilities. They run typical scans that the criminals would be using, and to make you aware of what they found, so that, you know, obviously we can patch up that hole. And they run these scans continuously through the policy period as well. And they're giving you feedback and information to help you secure the network. Obviously, it's kind of a win-win. It secures your network, but for them, it prevents claims at the same time. So you're starting to see a lot of insurtechs write cyber business outside of the standard markets of the Chubbs, the Travelers, the Hartfords. Those are the typical standard markets that you would see that's out there. The second thing that happened is you're going to start to see a lot of these cyber policies written on a non-admitted basis. So the difference between admitted and non-admitted for insurance product is in an admitted product is one, it's filed with the state, and second is protected by the state insurance fund. So if the carrier is unable to pay their claims, the insurance fund kicks in and pays the claims. But the reason that we're starting to see these written on a non-admitted basis is that it makes the carrier more nimble, because this exposure is shifting so rapidly. I mean, it's amazing that, you know, you look at last year's exposure to this year's exposure, the difference is amazing. So on a non-admitted basis, it allows the carrier to be a little bit more nimble. They don't have to go through the filing process with the state, which really slows everything down, so that they can change their forms and keep their forms updated as that exposure changes. The only caution that I throw in there is if you do throw it on a non-admitted basis, make sure that the carrier is an A- rated better on the AM Best rating. That means that they're financially stable and that they're going to be able to pay their claims. And then also what happened is you're seeing the pricing on these policies starting to right size themselves as well. So typically you're going to see on a renewal, on a cyber renewal, a 25% to 100% increase. And you'll probably see a shift in the carrier at the same time. And this went through phases. So the first group that was hit with this increase was really the large corporations that were out there. The second was the middle market, and now the last in what we're seeing this year is the smaller businesses are starting to see this 25 to 100% increase in cyber pricing. And really all it is doing is right sizing the market. It's getting the pricing to where it should be so that it can pay the claims. You know, like I said, pre-COVID, everything was deeply discounted. So it's really just getting the pricing where it should be. And then it's driving a lot of these exclusions and endorsements that are on there. Insurance tends to be very reactive. You're going to see exclusions thrown on there for breaches that they've already seen. You'll see the SolarWinds breach exclusion, you know, failure to maintain, those types of exclusions that are on there. So with this COVID shift, you're seeing a lot of changes in these cyber insurance policies. But one of the ones that really concerns me is this war on terrorism, especially what's going on in the Ukraine and Russia. Is we're very concerned about how these exclusions, because every insurance policy has a war exclusion into it. But on a cyber, it's a little bit unique because they don't have to come over to our country to create a war, right? They can fight this thing remotely. So Lloyd's introduced or announced that they're going to introduce 4 versions of the war exclusion, and it's going to be effective March of 2023. And their intent is to define cyber war. And we're going to see all the other carriers follow suit. Everybody else is going to be changing their war and cyber terrorism exclusions as well. But the funny thing about this is the intent was to define cyber war, but still they made the wording completely unclear. One of the specific phrases that they put in there is acting on behalf of. So basically what they're saying is it doesn't have to be the government or the military piece of the government that attacks us through a cyber war, but it could be somebody that's acting on behalf of the government or the military. So even though the intent was to really define it, make it clear, it's still very gray. So what we're going to end up seeing is there's going to be a lot of state cases, and the litigation is going to change the interpretation of these exclusions. So there's still going to be a lot of back and forth and a lot of gray area that happens within these things when these exclusions start to come out. And 2 of the critical cases that happened was through the NotPetya attack. Medela's, hopefully I pronounced that right. That one's still being litigated within court, but their stance is there was no physical contact, right? So with that one, it was Zurich is the one that denied their claim. And what their defense is listen, there was no physical contact. They never came over here. They didn't use typical war tools in order to attack us. So that one's still pending in court. But the Mersic one settled in favor of Mersic. And this one was with Chubb, I believe, is in New Jersey. And they really focused in on the act of war. in that a cyber attack doesn't involve violence. Same thing as the Mandela's case, but they didn't use armed forces in the traditional forms of warfare. So the court found in favor, saying, you're absolutely right. This is not typical war-like behavior. Therefore, the policy works, right? And that's why we're starting to see the revises in these exclusions, and hopefully we'll start to get more clarity out of it. Each policy's wording is different. Cyber policies have no standardization. You're going to see wording in every carrier's policy different from the other as well. So you have to be very mindful of the wording within those policies, and particularly within those war and cyber terrorism exclusions. The other endorsements, exclusions that we're seeing in there is Chubb and Beasley have put on a widespread event exclusion, basically saying that there's a huge widespread event, sort of like the NotPetya or the Microsoft Exchange one, that they're going to add co-insurance to it. So they're going to say, we're not going to pay the whole thing. You're going to be responsible for part of this breach costs as well. And then obviously the Russian Ukrainian exclusions are going to start to ask a lot of questions around this. If you have any type of Russian or Ukrainian exposure, that's going to be excluded. And we'll probably start to see other exclusions on there, that if the attack was brought on through Russian or Ukrainian military, that there's going to be exclusions that apply to this as well. So who are the criminals targeting? So the number one is industrials and engineering, followed by manufacturing, technology, professional services, financial, and healthcare. What's important about this slide is it shows the number of attack difference from 2020 to 2021. And you can see just how the increase of these attacks, and there's getting to be more and more of these attacks that happen onto them. One of the advantages right now is we're seeing a little bit of reprieve in the ransomware claims coming out of the Ukraine, I think primarily because their infrastructure has been upset a little bit. So that's slowed down a little bit, but it's obviously going to come back in full force as well. But these are the industries that we're seeing a lot of claims come out of. They're huge targets, obviously, for the criminals, not only from a ransomware, but from just a disruption standpoint as well. So what are the two major claims trends that we're seeing? Number one is ransomware, followed by cybercrime. So ransomware has matured as time goes on, and it's really just that cat and mouse game of the criminals figuring out what the controls are and figuring out how do we get around those controls. I kind of describe it as the radar detectors, right? Remember the radar detectors? It used to be the X band, then the Y band, then the XY, then it was the laser, the pulse. I mean, it's the back and forth, right? We just keep trying to beat each other. And unfortunately, we're usually on the responsive end. So version 1 of ransomware was really just an encryption event. They would launch an encryption software, they would lock up your data. The advantage to this is they didn't know who they got, and your data was never violated. Therefore, you didn't have to do notification, credit monitoring, any of those types of things. Actually, they added a layer of security to it, right? They added an encryption layer to it, and then they would sell you the encryption key. The control to this was pretty basic. It was you would just wash all your computers clean, restore from a backup. One of the things that we did find is that nobody tested their backups. They tried to restore from the backup, failed. They would end up paying the ransom anyway. But the key here is they never accessed the information. Pretty good. So the criminals figured that out. So they said, okay, if you're just going to restore from a backup, we got to figure out how to get around this. So then version 2 emerges. Version 2 is more of an extortion event. So what they do is launch the ransomware. It would sit in the system 2-3 weeks. During that time, it would port information back to them. And now that holds you to a higher level of response, because now your data has been violated and accessed. So now you're going to have to do notification and credit monitoring. And it would also map out the architecture of the network. So it was a more efficient lockup of the system as well. And then they would say, well, if you're just going to wash and restore from a backup, then we're going to utilize this information that we ported back, and we're going to monetize it. We're either going to sell it on the dark web, or we're going to embarrass you until you pay us. Right? We're going to call your clients and tell them that we have their data. We're going to call your board of directors and tell them that you've been breached. They're going to somehow use that data to get you to pay them. And the key is all they want is money. they're really not interested in this data. They're just looking to get paid. Most of these are performed by gangs, Eastern European, Russian, North Korean gangs, and all they want is the money. And secondly, is if you pay them, they go away, right? Because they don't typically, I mean, there's exceptions, of course, but they don't want a reputation out there saying that, oh, I paid them and, they wouldn't leave me alone, or, they still monetize my data. So there's kind of a honor among thieves there, but, it's getting critical. So then version 3, what we're seeing is they're not just going after the data and holding data ransom. They're starting to go after equipment as well. So any equipment that's online, the healthcare equipment, the manufacturing equipment, the nuclear camera that's online, anything that's online, they're starting to go after this, that they're realizing that this is a valuable asset as well, and that you're going to pay to get this information back. And they'll hit you with multiple attacks as well, just to get you to pay faster. Again, they're coming after the money. So we're seeing this version 3 where it's not just about them lacking or denying you access to your data, they're denying you access to your equipment as well. So now that's kind of the latest development that has happened, and it'll be interesting to see how version 4 starts to play out. Because again, it's that cat and mouse game of the criminals versus the good guys, right? So how does ransomware get into your system? So there's 2 types of drive-by downloading, which are the infected website. The first one is authorized, and this is without understanding what the consequences are, so that you go to the website, either download a document, click on a link that's on the website, you think you're going somewhere else, in the background it's just downloading that malware. The second is the unauthorized downloads, and this is, you don't even click on anything, you go to the website and it's just downloading malware in the background. It's just going crazy. The second one, and this is probably the one, actually Fred's graph showed that the phishing emails is the one that we see the most of. And I can't tell you how many of these I see in my personal email. Fortunately, our corporate email blocks a lot of these, but few of them do get through, right? This is your click here for your $5 Starbucks gift card, or the ones that are trying to get you to do something. You click onto it, downloads it into the back one. The other big one onto this, Fred actually picked this up with the HR, is they'll send you a resume to HR, say, hey, I'm looking for a job, open up the resume, looks like a regular Word document, PDF document, but in the background is just downloading that malware in the system. Very difficult to stop, very difficult to identify, as Fred mentioned earlier as well. The third one is scanning the network, looking for these remote access points through the remote desktop protocols, through the VPNs, and then they just brute force their way in, and they just launch that ransomware and just get it infected within the system. And then we're also starting to see software vulnerabilities, where they're looking for those vulnerabilities within the software, the Log4j, which was the Java, right? Microsoft Exchange, are looking for any type of unpatched holes. And that's why it's so important to patch when those patches come out. That's what the Microsoft Exchange breach was all about. Those that patched didn't get hit, those that didn't patch got hit with the virus, right? Because the patches fix known threats or known weaknesses to the software things. And then one that's often overlooked is USB drives. This one is when they'll put a USB drive in the lobby, in the parking lot, something like that. They'll write confidential payroll, something interesting onto it, so that the employee will take that, go back, plug it into the system, and it just downloads the malware right through the USB drives. So they have a lot of creative ways to get these ransomware into your system, and it's ever changing, right? They're just looking for easy ways to do it, things that take a very little effort with a high reward. So who's behind these attacks? So ransomware is really money driven, right? So we're seeing a lot of Russian, Eastern European gangs, North Korea. And the thing about this is, which is interesting about it, is it's not some guy that's hiding down in his basement, sitting in front of guitars, but it's really a very developed business. It's a guy who shows up, works 9 to 5, has a quota. They do it ransomware as a service. They don't even create their own ransomware. They actually farm it out, and they just hire somebody to do the ransomware. There's help desks. It's very well organized. It's not, it's not broken up. It's very well organized through these gangs. And now what we're starting to see is other governments are starting to see this as a revenue stream to feed their economy. Turkey and Colombia have just been identified that they're utilizing ransomware to feed their economy. it's highly lucrative, takes very little effort. And if you're operating in these countries where you're protected, there's no downside. There's no repercussions unless you leave the country. It's interesting. We actually got one guy that went to vacation to Spain. It was actually Hartford FBI or New Haven FBI that picked up onto it. They grabbed him at the airport, brought him back, and tried him in Hartford courts. But that's rare, few in between, right? The other thing that they're looking for is information. China's huge on this. They're looking for information, financial, government information, anything that's going to further their country. China's trying to get independent. They'll do it by any means necessary. So they're really looking for information. And then the third is hacktivism. These are political and social agendas that they're utilizing. And a big one on this was Anonymous, right? Anonymous, when the Ukrainian war hit, they attacked Putin's yacht and they sent it to hell. They do it more from their political or social agendas, and that's what drives those ones. And they're very powerful on getting their points across as well. So it's interesting, and it just keeps on changing. So the second biggest claim that we're seeing is cybercrime. And cybercrime is about theft of monies, right? So the first one is funds transfer fraud. Funds transfer fraud is when they obtain your banking credentials, they hack into your computer systems and they wire the funds out, right? So the key is they take the money from you. That's what they define as funds transfer fraud. But money is the trigger. Money is what needs to be indemnified. That's what's the key there, and that they're taking it from you. The CEO scam, Fred brought up a great case onto this one. That's when they purport to be the CFO, the CEO, and they get somebody in the finance department to wire the funds out, right? They con them out of it. I know we saw one internally at Smith Brothers, picked up on it pretty quickly. Red flags are always, it's very urgent, it has to be done by noon. The one that we received is that we were purchasing an agency down in New York, and we had to have the money sent there before noon for the deal to be able to go through. Everything's all about urgency, detection. They don't want anybody called to verify, and that's the best control, is to call and verify any type of communication. The other one onto this, another funny case is gift cards, right? So the finance employee got an email, looked like it was from the CFO, said, hey, we're rewarding a bunch of employees. I need you to go out and gift these gift cards. The employee actually bounced back and said, well, I wasn't aware of this. They said, oh, that's because you're one of the employees, so please don't say anything to anybody and just go get the gift cards. And I always wondered, why gift cards, right? What do these criminals care about a Walmart, Target, gift card? And then I finally figured it out. And what it is gift cards are untraceable. And what they can do is turn it into Bitcoin. And that's what they do with these gift cards, is they utilize it to really move the cash around or launder the money through Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is really the currency that they use because it's undetectable or untraceable. The next one is invoice manipulation. Invoice manipulation is they send you a false invoice, you pay the invoice. We had a big claim onto this one. It was an interesting one. It was a manufacturer that dealt with this company in Malaysia. They received an invoice, they sent it. Fortunately, they picked up that it was a false invoice pretty quickly and got the proper authorities involved. They tracked the money down. They actually found the money. It was 200,000 sitting in a bank account in Malaysia. They called that bank and said, you freeze that money, that's illegal funds. And the bank said, oh, sorry, only the requester of the funds can release the funds. The next morning they released it, which is a little crazy all in itself, but these invoice manipulations is a big thing. You actually see endorsements on cyber policies that pick up this exposure as well. And then the fourth one is social engineering. Social engineering is them conning you out of something, right? They could be conning you out of data, sort of like the municipalities fell victim to this, where they're giving away W-2 information. We saw a lot of the Connecticut municipalities fall for that, where they're conning you out of that information. But in the cybercrime, they're conning you out of money, right? So a lot of times this is referred to as wire fraud, where you get the false wiring instructions sent to you, you act upon those, and you send the money. The interesting thing about it is there's really two sides to this exposure. There's the crime side of the exposure and the cyber side. Anytime we talk about crime, money's the trigger. Money's what needs to be indemnified. So the crime side of it is when you receive that fraudulent wire, You act upon the email, you wire the funds. Now, the key is they didn't take it from you. You sent it to them. They conned you out of it. Social engineering, crime exposure, because money is what needs to be indemnified. So that's the crime side of it. Anytime we talk about crime, it's about money. That's the side of the exposure. You'll find that it's very difficult to find coverage for this, especially high limits, because this claim is so prevalent within the industry that the carriers are really looking to limit their exposure here. But now the flip side of this exposure is the cyber side of the exposure. Anytime we talk about cyber in the insurance world, we're talking about data and information. That's when they con you out of the data and the information. So that's when the criminal purports to be you. They send an email to your client, to financial, whomever. They act upon that email. They wire the funds. You're not out the money. They're out the money. However, chances of them having proper coverage, pretty nil. They're going to come back looking for the deep pockets, and they're going to come back to you and say, well, you failed to secure your email server, so you're partially responsible for this loss. So now they've used your data, cyber, maliciously against you, triggers your cyber policy. Cyber policy is going to pay for the forensics, determine were they indeed in my email, how did they pull this crime off. It's going to pay for your legal fees, and then it can pay for the damages, if so assessed as well. So that wire fraud really has the two sides to the exposure. You want to make sure that you cover both sides of it. And there's a lot of gray area that happens. And this is another one, just like ransomware, it's a moving target. They are getting better and better and better at pulling this scam off. It used to be really easy with the prince and his lottery ticket, but now it's very sophisticated. They are fine tuning this exposure. So be very cautious of this. The best control obviously here is to call to verify everything with a number that's outside of the communication chain, or they call it within the channel. So number one control for that is call to verify. So what are the top 5 controls that we're seeing really reduced claims? And almost every carrier is going to ask that you have these 5 controls implemented within your organization as well. The first and the number one is multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is using 2 forms of authentication to sign into things. And it's usually 2 out of 3 things. It's something you know, something you have, or something that you are. Great example of this, go to the gas station, pay for the gas, you put in the credit card, something you have, ask you for the zip code, something you know. 2 forms to authenticate, could be fingerprint, could be iris, could be something that you are as well, right? MFA isn't going to stop everything. If these guys want you, they're coming after you. More than likely, they're going to get you. I describe multi-factor as the club, right? The car thief's walking down, he sees the club on the steering wheel, he just moves to the next car. You know, obviously, if he wanted that car, he could get through that club, but it just takes an extra step. It's a little bit more labor for him. He's just going to go for the lower hanging fruit. So multi-factor authentication is huge. Having this in all different levels of your network is critical as well. Second is having a solid backup strategy and having it air-gapped. Air-gapped meaning that it's not connected to your network, it's separate. That way you get hit with ransomware, it doesn't hit your backup, just hits your network, and that you can restore from that backup. And also, like I said earlier, make sure you test it. We ran into so many situations where the backup failed because it was never tested. They were just backing up every day, backing up. All of a sudden we needed to test it, fails. So can't stress that enough. Make sure that it's tested. Number 3, patch scheduling. Patch scheduling, touched on this a little bit earlier. Make sure that you put the patches in as soon as they come. I know a lot of IT companies like to hold on to them because they do them on the weekend, have to bring the network down. It's a little bit laborious, but it's very important to put these patches in as soon as you possibly can, because those are the known holes that are out there, and these criminals are going to capitalize on to those and use that to get into the network. The 4th one is using encryption, and encryption is going to be for data at rest and data in motion. Data at rest is anything that's sitting on your laptop, sitting on your computers. Connecticut actually gives you safe harbor that if you have an encrypted laptop, it's stolen, lost, or whatever, they don't feel that that data is violated. You don't have to do notification or any of those types of things. So you get a little bit of safe harbor in there, very important. And then data in motion is any type of sensitive data that you're emailing. Make sure that you're using an encryption software so that you're sending an encrypted email as well. And then the 5th one, which insurance companies aren't hardcore about this yet, but I believe they're going to get to this, is endpoint protection. Endpoint protection is having software on each and every computer or endpoint that monitors the traffic that's coming in. It's looking for known threats. It's looking for anomalies. And if it identifies anything, it can isolate that threat, contain it, try to limit the exposure to the rest of the network, and it drastically reduces your period of loss or period of restoration rather. So those are the 5 main ones that you're going to see insurance carriers #1 asked to be implemented, but they're also the top 5 that we're seeing that is drastically starting to reduce claims and help organizations do it. So some of the other questions that you're going to see on cyber applications for insurance, the only thing that I like about these is these are things that they've found are effective to help manage the risk. And that's really why these underwriters are looking for these types of solutions. Is the more that you can answer yes, the better the risk you are, the better the pricing is, right? So it's all part of the underwriting process. But I like it because it gets the wheels turning in the head. What types of things should I have implemented, or the carriers think that I might have? So does the company provide cyber training? Do they utilize the password management tools? Implement geo-blocking? Is the network segmented that's out? A lot of these, you can kind of read. Do they implement the endpoint protection, which we talked about? Do we use personal devices that are out there? What's the last time we did a pen testing? Pen testing is they tried to hack into your computer system. If you ever find a pen test guy at a party, he's got the best stories, by the way, because there's several ways that they can do a pen test. They can try to hack into your system and find the weaknesses there. They can do a physical penetration where they dress up in a tech shirt and see if they can get into your server room, or see if they can access information off of people's desks and stuff like that. The pen test guys are great. DNS filtering, SPF, which is just authenticating emails. How much data does the company collect? That one's kind of interesting, because if you go overseas, the only thing overseas or the EU is concerned about, which we don't really care about, is GDPR, right? So that's their regulation that they have to be compliant to. And GDPR is all about protecting the information that you're responsible for. But one of the pieces to that is knowing where that information resides. And I think what happens over here, because we're not GDPR focused, is that we don't know where our information is, and we don't know how much we've even collected. We don't even know the quantity of information that we're responsible for. So sometimes just doing an inventory, what type of information, how much of it do we have, where does it reside, is a good practice or a good exercise to do as well. Do you have a designated CIO function? This is becoming more and more common, that you have somebody that you've assigned the functions of a CIO to if you don't have a CIO. And this brings me to one of the biggest mistakes that I see happen out there, that I see business owners and boards do, is they delegate it to the IT guy. And they say, hey, listen, I don't know anything about cyber. I need you guys as the IT professionals to make sure that I'm cyber secure. However, when there's a breach, the attorney general comes knocking on your door, says, hey, what did you do to protect your organization against this known threat? And saying, oh, my IT's got it. My IT guy is going to take care of it for me. Not unacceptable. You have to address this exposure from the top down. So you need to have that CIO. Connecticut also just implemented another one, that if you've adopted one of the framework, whether it be NIST, ISO, any of these, that they're not going to fine you, or you'll be reprieved from the fines. And one of those topics is addressing the CIO functions as well. Network assessments are huge. Just doing an assessment on your network, I can't recommend that enough as well. And then having a list of your policies and procedures that are created around data and information. So those are some of the questions that you're going to see on the insurance application. They just help you secure your network. So what are some of the risk reduction strategies to utilize or to implement? And it's really the 5 standard risk management techniques of avoidance, prevention, mitigation, transfer, and acceptance. But when I sit down with clients, what I describe it is how you got to build walls, and almost to Fred's point, right? You build the walls around the castle with the moats and everything like that. You want to build as many as you can, as big as you can, as thick, as tall, right? You want to just build those strategies onto them. And those walls is the physical wall. How do I physically secure it? The IT wall. How do I do it from an IT perspective? Policy, procedures, training, culture. And then the last one is the insurance wall. If they crash through everything else, the insurance wall is there as a safety net to make sure that the business doesn't go out of business. It pays all of those expenses that are incurred. So we'll go a little bit deeper into each one of these. The first one is the physical wall. How do I physically secure my data, right? So data isn't just electronic. I'm a Gen Xer. I do everything on paper. I still have filing cabinets. I love to print things. I like to read physical things, right? You give me something on the computer, I can't comprehend it. I need a highlighter. So how do we physically secure this data? Are we locking our file cabinets? Are we locking the office? Do we have a clean desk policy? At the end of the day, we get the information off of our desks and off of the printers and all of those types of things. Are we locking the server room? Everything from a physical perspective. How do we physically secure the data? One interesting claim on this topic is it was a box, Iron Shore box that was going to Iron Shore of healthcare records. Somehow it fell off the box. It showed up at a daycare as scrap paper. So they didn't physically secure that data, especially as it was being transported. The second one is the IT. We can spend thousands and thousands of dollars on IT preventative, but IT is only one of the walls in our defenses. And that's, anything from antivirus, firewalls, anything from an IT perspective. We can go crazy here, but the important thing to note is it's just one wall in our line of defense, but it's a critical wall. Don't get me wrong. The third one, and I think this is the most important one for business owners and boards, because they have the most control over this wall, and that's creating solid policies and procedures to address how you interact with data. And the first one is the data information security policy. This is really taking a holistic view of data and the relationship within the organization. How do we take it in? How do we collect the information? What type of information do we collect? How does it flow through our corporation? Who has access to it? Does everybody need access to it? How do we destroy it? How long do we hold on to it? Does it go up to the cloud? Hard drives, when we get rid of computers, do we destroy the hard drives, printers, copiers, those types of things? It's really just taking that holistic view of our interaction with data, how we get it, how we destroy it, and who has access to it, right? The second one is contract reviews, and that's reviewing your contracts with your vendors. Where does that liability finger point when they're breached, right? So if they're breached, are you still responsible? Chances are yes, but you want to know that. And if you can write the contract to make them liable for their breach, that's even better, right? Because that takes the risk off of you. But ultimately, the collector of the information is responsible for that information. The third one, I can't tell you how important the incident response plan is. I described this almost as the fire drill. We know what to do when there's a fire. We get out of the building, we call 911, we call the insurance guy, the adjusters come out. We know how to recover from a fire, but we're actually more apt to have a cyber breach than a fire in our building. So what's my response plan for a cyber breach, right? I can't call 911. Quite honestly, they don't care. So who does care? Who's on my response team? Who's responsible for doing what? Who's my first call, second call, third call? How do I respond when my information is breached or I experience a cyber breach? You want to have that detail. You also want to make sure that you obviously have this in a hard file as well. You want it on paper. It's on the computer's locked up, you don't have access to it. You want multiple copies of this in a hard paper form so that when a cyber incident happens, you can respond quickly and efficiently, drastically, again, reducing that period of restoration. And then the other policies, password policy, mobile device policy, bring your own device policy, anything that revolves around data and how you handle data. You want to make sure that you have a policy that addresses that as well. The next one is training and culture. And this one is another one. Can't tell you how important this is because creating that culture of awareness and training the employees that they are part of the defense. Because any one of these walls, you take down one of the walls, it affects the other walls, right? It only takes one employee to click on the wrong link, and all of a sudden you circumvented the IT and the policy and procedure wall. So each of these walls are kind of dependent upon each other as well, and they're very important. So you really want to train your employees of the latest and greatest trends that we're seeing, the social engineering, test them, do phishing scams to see if they fall for it. It's kind of an environment of see something, say something. The quicker that you can respond to something, you don't want somebody to report something and then they get penalized for it, because you want to encourage people to report things so that we can address it quickly and efficiently. So training and culture is another one. And then the last one is the insurance wall. The insurance wall is there. They crash through everything else. The insurance policy is going to be there to pay for all those expenses that you incur during a data breach, which is notification, credit monitoring, legal fees, fines and regulations, business interruption, ransomware, extortionware, crisis event. There are so many expenses that you're going to incur in a data breach. You want to make sure that you have an insurance policy that's there to pay for them. The key with insurance policies as well is that none of them are equal, and none of them are, there's no ISO to it. There's no standardization within these either. And they're constantly changing in order for two things. One is they want to change to address the exposure, to make sure that we're capturing the exposure as the exposure changes. But then we're also seeing the carriers limit their exposure, right, through endorsements and through exclusions. So you have to be mindful of both of the aspects of it. You want to make sure that you get the broadest policy that you can, make sure that it captures the exposure as it changes, and make sure that you minimize the number of exclusions and endorsements that are on your policy as well. The second thing is make sure that it's a standalone policy. This exposure has become large enough that it needs to be addressed separately. I do not put this as an endorsement on your professional liability, your BOP, your package policy onto those others. The intent of those policies is not to cover a cyber event. It's a throw-in coverage. They just throw it in there because some coverage is better than no coverage. You need to address this separately. You get the standalone policy, make sure that policy fits your typical exposure, not somebody else's, that is fitting your exposure and covering all of those aspects that you would incur in a cyber breach as well. So can't stress that enough. Let's see, how's our timing going? We got 5 minutes. So I guess we'll do questions later. So we'll continue on. So when you look at an insurance policy, you're going to see that there's first party coverages and third party coverages. The first party coverages are the expenses that you're going to incur, which is your business interruption, vandalism, you're hit with the ransomware, you got to pay that ransom, equipment damage. This is newer to cyber policies. Equipment damage used to be handled on the BOP or the package because it was property, but now they're putting it onto cyber policies as well to give you that extra coverage. Sometimes this is known as bricking. Bricking is when they send so much data to your devices that it just burns it out and it turns it into basically a brick. Pays for those fines and regulations that you get hit with from regulations, pays your attorney fees, public relations, forensics to determine what happened, how to stop it. And then it also pays those third-party coverages. That's for paying those third parties of notification, credit monitoring, defamation and slander on your website, media coverage. If you transmit code to somebody else, they utilize your system in order to send malware to your clients, to your vendors. It protects that as well. Target was the big one on this, right? The big Target breach that we had was actually through their HVAC vendor. They found a way in to insert that code. The cyber policy would have picked that up. Upstream as well. Dependent business is a newer one that you're seeing as well. Dependent business interruption coverage is if you're dependent on another business in order to operate. So if you have a document management software system that you utilize to operate your business, they get hit with ransomware, you suffer business interruption due to them being unable to provide the service to you. Your cyber policy may pick up that business interruption piece of it as well. And then other coverages to consider. A lot of coverages are silent on rogue employees. Rogue employees is a exposure I think that a lot of organizations don't think about. The FBI actually had a really cool video onto this one. It was about a manufacturer and how one of their employees was being manipulated to come over to China and sell the secret ingredients to earthquake shatterproof glass. But your employees are also a risk, so they're your internal cyber risk of them stealing information, them selling the information. So you make sure that your policies address that internal threat. It's not all external. There is a huge internal threat that's in there as well. Make sure that the records include electronic and paper. Again, data is not just electronic, it's paper as well. So if your paper is violated, you want to make sure that you have coverage for that as well. And in events, obviously, claims anywhere in the world, because we don't just live in our own little state. We live now in the global economy, and then war versus cyber terrorism. You really want to make sure that you address the wording that's in the policies for each one of those definitions. So that's all I've got. Hopefully this was beneficial to you. We're going to do questions and answers. It looks like a little bit later. So looking forward to, if you have any questions, to those as well. So we'll send it back to you, Scott.
All right. Thank you very much, Scott. Just get this back up on the screen here. All right. Yeah. Some really, alarming stats there, Scott. So good to know what's going on, especially in the industries that we're talking about here, healthcare, manufacturing, and financial services. The cyber insurance space certainly has changed quite a bit in the past couple of years. So it's really good to know your recommendations in the space. All right, we are back. And now we're going to move into our industry specific speaker presentations. So I'd like to introduce to you all, we have from the healthcare industry, we have Todd McDonough. He is the principal and CEO of Healthcare Compliance Network. So he's going to be speaking to us as it relates to the healthcare space. Followed up by John Mumford, the president and chief risk officer of Fellsway Group. John's going to be speaking a little bit about the manufacturing space and what's going on there. And then ending us will be Elizabeth Esposito from Buckley Technology Group. She is the vice president of professional services there, and she's going to be speaking to her expertise and their work that they do with financial institutions. So that being said, I will turn it over to Todd. Todd, if you want to go ahead and take over the presentation, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Great, thank you, Scott. Hopefully everybody can see my information at this point. Yes, so as Scott had explained, I'm with the healthcare industry, work for a compliance company. Scott Garcia and Dr. Scholler, is great to hear from the academic point of view as well as the insurance point of view. Had the opportunity, Scott, over the last several years to sort of see the maturity of the cyberspace. Used to be 10 years ago, it was a bit of the Wild West in terms of trying to steer our clients towards cyber programs and letting them understand just exactly what they needed to get themselves involved in. Healthcare is a little bit of a different animal in regards to the fact that there's a fairly specific set of regulations that are in place and things that the physician practices as well as healthcare systems need to do in order to safeguard what in our world is called professional, our protected health information, or PHI. And of course, that comes in two various forms, in the electronic version, in the physical version, which practices on a daily basis are dealing with both. The EHR, as they're going through their routines and making sure that they're getting their electronic systems. Everybody who's been patients has seen over the last 10 years the progression from paper into the EHRs, more accessibility into the portals where you can get more information at your disposal. And then, of course, there's, although the EHRs were claiming that they were supposed to take away the physical aspect, that just doesn't happen. So those groups have to contend with both. But I wanted to just jump in here because I'm going to try to get down to the risk assessment element, which is probably the most crucial element as it relates to the physician practice space in healthcare in general. But I wanted to emphasize a couple of quick things here going through about patient access. And one of the things that's occurred over the last several years, both within the Office of Civil Rights as well as which is part of Health and Human Services, and within the Cures Act, is there's a real initiative through both of these acts and organizations to push forward patient access. Can't really tell you why, because for our purposes and the people and for the stuff that we do, the accessibility that our clients are giving to their patients has always been pretty quick. But I think that there's an element here of trying to push things and being more real time. And one of the things that that we've seen with the Cures Act, and in the Cures Act, it calls for HSS to create a new rule that will improve the flow of healthcare data between providers, patients, and developers of health IT, primarily the EHR companies. So over the last year, there's been a lot of work that EHR companies are doing to kind of manifest the relationships between their systems and the portals where we actually go in and gather our information. There's also a large initiative being pushed in this aspect to be able to do interoperability and to stop information blocking. Information blocking, this information that has sort of accumulated in these EHR system has been very valuable in many aspects. And what's happened is that some of these companies have felt that information was their information and it was not warranted for them to be able to share that. That is completely untrue and is completely against what Hipaa was all about, which was about portability and the ability to have transparency. So there's initiatives going forward, and we're still waiting, although it's been a year plus since we've had some additional informations that the final comment period had gone through with regards to the OCR for some new regs to come down. When that happens, I stopped guessing after the beginning of the year because it's just hard to know. Technically, the government is still in what's called a emergency health situation. So a lot of the activities from a perspective of findings and penalties and adjudication, all those things have kind of been constrained in many ways. The only thing that hasn't been constrained, and I marked it here, is the penalties for those groups that have not given that access freely to their patients. And that is a swift $85,000 fine. That is no questions asked. It's pretty much going to be coming at you if somebody is coming up and saying that you're holding their data and not being able to freely submit that to them for the purposes that they need for the continuity and the continuation or consistency of their healthcare. So what I've got here is a recent amendment that came into play as part of the High Tech Act, and that came into play in January of 2021. And this has become known as the Hipaa Safe Harbor Law because really the basis of this was for the Office of Civil Rights, who handles everything that comes into their world that may be of a reportable nature. There's elements that take place that happen all day long in regards to facilities and healthcare, is that there's incidences that may happen with regards to the protected health information. Some of those are unreportable. Incidences that need to be addressed and need to be mitigated and remediated within the organizations that have that, which is something that we help them with, as well as the reportable breaches. And when those go in, there's a whole facility of activities that need to be walked through by putting the information into the HHS site for reportables. And what has occurred in this particular HR 7898 is that when that information goes in, there's a set of information that they want to make sure that you are minding the store on, and it's basically these 5 top threats. The law itself instructs the HHS to take into account that practices in healthcare are using best practices in a HIPAA related entity as adopted in the 12 months preceding that particular breach. So if you can show as an organization that you have taken measures, some of those were discussed by Scott Garcia and some of the things that he was looking at, that you can definitively show that you are paying attention to the possibility of phishing attacks and ransom attacks, which have been discussed already today. And then the other areas that they want you to be able to define and show that you've got some sensibility about is the loss of theft of equipment. So if there's laptops, phones, desktops, things that may have been removed from a location, whether they've been removed from a smash and dash through a theft, or they've been removed through the location because the organization was cycling out new systems and bringing new systems in. There's a whole protocol that needs to be maintained in doing that and pushing forward with that. The accidental loss of information, whether that happens both intentionally or unintentionally, and then the possibility that you've got an understanding that the medical devices that are attached to your network, which oftentimes, if they're older, aren't running the same softwares that are compatible with what may be on the network. So there may be potential vulnerabilities there. So there's this is really important information to look at, because the extent of this information is giving those organizations the opportunity to potentially have a reduced fine. Most things that end up finding their way into reportables have some element of fine to them. It's based upon a whole criteria that I won't get into here. But this safe harbor is really, to me, a very important step that's been made by the OCR in conjunction with the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technologies, that works to create the framework that organizations are utilizing. And then these are just some 10 areas that practices need to be looking at across to understand more of the cybersecurity pieces. This element here is the actual cybersecurity framework that the NIST organization has put together. I could spend a whole hour in going through this, but we've only got just a short period of time. Which brings me down to the area where I wanted to really just emphasize what's most important in the healthcare industry as it relates to in securing and making sure that you've got the necessary functions in place is to perform a security risk assessment. And this covers 3 real important areas. It covers the technical area, the physical area, and the administrative area. Technical, some of those things have been discussed already. And very important that you work in conjunction with someone internally as your IT, or if you're a practice that doesn't have the ability or just doesn't have the need for an internal IT, is to work with a managed service provider. CoopSys is one of those organizations that certainly is helping healthcare organizations work through setting up systems and making sure that there's ensuring that there's the right procedures and right processes in place to safeguard the technical side. The physical is what it exactly is your location buttoned up in a way that that if you need to have various elements of videos and monitoring, you have those in place. If your servers are on site, are those services well protected in a locked environment? Aspects of the building itself. So there's aspects around the physical side, and the administrative side. If you can't technically take care of issues that have to deal with your organization from a technical side, then you have to be able to put those into policy form. And Scott had mentioned some of that. So some quick things with regards to the SRA. There's a contract that has to take place between covered entities, which are the physician practice groups, healthcare groups that, and the business associates. And the business associate is defined as an organization that is working in conjunction with your practice, and they need to have access to patient information in order to do that job, or they may store that information for you. And there's an arrangement that's called a business associate agreement. That's a legal binding documentation that says, as these two organizations working in conjunction with one another, they have an obligation to be able to share with each other the ability to make sure that information, that PHI, is being safeguarded. And the legal language in that is very specific. Scott had mentioned that in the case where if you're creating a contract, you can kind of put that information in there. Well, from a liability perspective, what this put in place was that says whether it's the business associate or the covered entity who's responsible for the breach, whoever that is in this contract, they have to stand up and be able to take the responsibility and potentially the financial obligations that are related to that. Chain passwords, we're moving into the age now, and it was discussed by both Dr. Scholler and by Scott, the element that has to go with multi-factor authentication. We are seeing our practices finally get into those notions, which is a great thing because it obviously reinforces the idea of accessing systems in a much more secure way. Encryption is obviously an important thing that needs to be done on systems that are especially portable. If there's multi-locations and you've got laptops that are floating between docks, those need to be encrypted. Even those systems that are in place at locations can never go wrong in terms of having things encrypted, and encryption costs have come down dramatically. That's an important aspect that should be in place and utilized on a regular basis now. The OCR asks that in the capacity as being a good HIPAA citizen, that you go through a rigorous element of auditing your records. So your EHR goes through an auditing process. You make sure that people in the EHR are looking at the information that's only germane to what they should be looking at. If people are in the EHR and they're floating around and not looking at those informations, and you've heard the stories about situations where celebrities are gone to a doctor's office and the patients go in and they look at information and they share that with so-and-so. Those are actual situations that would fall within a category of a breach. So there's a myriad of aspects that you need to look at in terms of the audit trail. Email auditing. There's the audit side on the IT side that gets handled by the managed service providers or your IT folks. And you can never forget the physical. If you've been into doctor's offices, you understand that there's boxes around that have little slits into those. This is where all the information that gets handled on a daily basis that has protected health elements to that gets slipped into, and then that information is then shredded by a shredding company. And a lot of times that information may find itself into the regular wastebasket. So if it does, and we've had situations where we've had to work with clients that where there's been a breach of information, and we've had to track down from the companies that picked up that information of where that was going, what's the chain of custody? Did that go to a place where it was destroyed, or did it go to a landfill? So there's a whole methodology that has to get taken place so you have to pay attention to that, and everybody needs to know that you have to go through the training. Scott had talked about policies and procedures. These are elements that need to be specific to the organization in healthcare. They need to show workflows around those elements, around password policies and workstation management, disposal policies. There's probably 10 or 15 different parts of the HIPAA policy procedure manual that have to incorporate those workflows. And they need to incorporate those workflows because if there is a breach, the OCR will want to see those, and they want to see that they're not boilerplated, but they are specific. And they also want to know that your people understand those, and that your people understand what their responsibilities are as employees, that information that they're seeing on a regular basis of patients is private information, and that information is important, that you secure and that you go through your process with a security risk assessment. And with that said, I will flip the back over to you, Scott.
All right, great. Thanks, Todd. Also a lot of good insight there in the healthcare space in which you guys certainly operate in. I just want to echo the importance of the security risk assessment that Todd talked about. And I know our next presenter, John Mumford, is going to preach that as well. Security risk assessments are so important for regulated industries or not. They're just a good business practice to perform within your organization. So can't stress that enough. So with that said, John, I'll transition over to you and take it away.
Yeah, appreciate it, Scott. Humbled to be presenting to folks today, be alongside the other speakers, Dr. Scholl, Scott Garcia, and also Todd. Great information exchange so far. You might expedite some of the information on my slides because you've covered some of that, which is a good thing. I'll try to speak slowly enough because I want to deliver a lot of content, but want to make sure it's meaningful and valuable to the listeners. So my name is John Mumford. And again, thank you, Scott, for asking us to present today. We're passionate about helping our clients manage risk, cyber risk from the top down. So Felsway Group is a cyber risk management consulting firm specializing in providing fractional CISO expertise, resources, and advisory services. And as I talk about, we believe cyber risk is a business risk, and that it's building resilience within the organization through maturity, not just security posture. But without further ado, today's conversation is about securing manufacturers. Again, I'm humbled to provide my experience and knowledge as valuable insights for the folks that are listening. And I hope that our recommendations are meaningful for you to at least begin on your journey to having a more secure environment. So the agenda that I'll go through is I'll share various challenges, threats, and risks to the manufacturing industry, and then talk about the expanding attack surface. And while talking about that, I'll share what a common network in a manufacturer looks like. And then I'll describe the anatomy of the most prevalent ransomware attack. And then I'll share top 4 areas that will help manufacturers secure their facilities and their environment. So key thing to note is what is worth protecting. And as Scott mentioned and others throughout the dialogue, is it's about risk management. And I'll just spend 2 seconds talking about what do we mean by risk management? Well, if you don't have an asset worth protecting, then is there really a risk? But if you do have an asset worth protecting, then is there a threat against that asset, whether it's your data, your systems, your people, your brand, your reputation? If there isn't a threat against it, do you have a risk? So you need to have a threat against an asset worth protecting, and now you have a risk, and now you have to build the strategies and control mechanisms to protect. So what are the challenges that manufacturers face is they have a very complex and probably outdated network that's causing issue for them to secure devices within that framework, as well as the fact that through digital transformation and automation, there are more IoT and OT devices connected to your network that are probably also connected to the internet. So chasing that and managing that challenge is becoming more difficult. Identity management, we all have talked about passwords, but identities is who has access to what. So as you add more widgets and devices and services and complexities, making sure you're effectively managing not only the onboarding of new identities, but also the offboarding. We see a lot of identities left dormant, even though the system or facility or person has no longer needed that access. And growing privacy concerns. There's more to privacy than just laws and regulations. Privacy also speaks to, the protection of your intellectual property and things like that. So that's more about data protection. and privacy. Third-party suppliers, we all can't do our jobs by ourselves. We rely on folks like Cooperative Systems or other companies, suppliers, providers, vendors to support our initiatives. And are they as secure as we are? Are they our weakest link in the supply chain of the delivery of our goods and services? And then just the ever-growing and ever increasing compliance regulations that put a lot of strain on our resources and may feel like they're distracting us from our common value because we have to remain compliant. And most notably in the manufacturing area would be the CMMC concept of making sure you have, for the Department of Defense, a mature score on your security practices. So what are we seeing in the world of threats and risks to manufacturers? If I took a page out of the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report, or DBIR, what you could see over the several years I'm projecting here is stolen credentials is going down. The reason they don't need to steal credentials, the bad actors don't need to steal credentials any longer, is there's so many stolen credentials out on the dark web, they can just go buy them and not have to put forth the effort to go steal them yet again. Malware and phishing is increasing, as everybody on the call has been talking about. Ransomware attacks, although they may be stalling a little bit, they have been increasing to this point because of the ease of being able to attack folks through purchases in the dark web of script kiddies and things like that. Financially motivated people are more into disrupting things than maybe extorting money, but they're starting to actually do both, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the external threat actor is increasing because of the bad actors are scaling their own tools and services. So anybody can go buy off the dark web a ransomware kit and go ransom, somebody themselves, and they can ramp up very quickly. So external threat actors are increasing, as well as how they try to draw people out of the organization and pay them, $10,000 to give them, keys to the kingdom. So you have that threat landscape and how it's shifting in a certain direction. But I also wanted to talk about the evolution of attacks. Prior to 2019, you would see bad actors target a single weakness within an organization to either steal credentials or perform wire transfer fraud or some form of denial of service attack to disrupt the business. Again, as part of scaling, people are getting in tune to that, so they can thwart some of those singular attacks. So what will happen, what we started to see happen, is there'll be a dual attack. So while they're distracting you over here, trying to cause a denial of service, they'll then ransom you over there, so that you're distracted by one incident and they're beginning to run a second incident against you to achieve their goal. But then in 2021 and beyond, we're seeing far more global attacks. Again, if you think in terms of scaling, what they're trying to do is hit more people with one shot. So you think of phishing campaigns, and everybody's talked about phishing campaigns and these various scams. The internet and email has provided scale for them, because I could just get a list of people and in one push out 1,000, 1,000,000 emails in one shot. That's the old school of creating scale, that all I need is one person to click on that Prince email to scam them. But these global attacks that I'm talking about are the things like SolarWinds or Microsoft Exchange, or things like you see like that, where they're attacking these critical systems that everybody, including manufacturing and critical infrastructure folks, use these products. And if they can attack those products, immediately it deploys their attack on anybody who's using that system. So this is complex, this is scary, and this is real, and we have to pay attention. So, with those challenges, with these threats and these evolving attacks, what is happening in the manufacturing is the expansion of your attack surface. whether it's through digital transformation or COVID and people working from home, you know, having flexible work arrangements and moving to the cloud, and, you know, people can work from anywhere is increasing that attack surface, because we don't know where the perimeter of our network is any longer. And in addition, I mentioned earlier about identities and authentication mechanisms and things like that. Systems need identities to talk to each other. People need identities to talk to systems and get access to data. Your third parties need identities. And if we're not paying attention to identities and who has access to what, and managing that like any other critical information, that's a big miss we're starting to see. Is you might back up a critical financial database, but are you backing up your Active Directory as an example? So the next thing is, again, I mentioned third parties, attacks, whether it's attacks on service providers you interact with, or it's attacks on software suppliers you work with or install in your systems. These are things that we have to pay attention to as that attack surface continues to expand. And the fact that IoT, you know, I love when I walk through a manufacturing site and I see that people have IoT devices, whether it's in their air conditioning unit or, whether it's in their manufacturing equipment. And these things are perpetually connected, not only to your own network, but also to the internet. And if you don't think these devices are quote unquote listening or interacting, we need to create the mindset that the perpetual connected devices, whether it's to your network or to the internet, causes that expansion of your attack surface as well. So let's talk about what a common network looks like and why I'm suggesting that it's complex and outdated. What we see is common themes is manufacturing environments have what we call a flat network. Everything is connected to everything. So, the video camera in the conference room is connected to the same network that a printer is connected to, or a phone system, or even the manufacturing equipment, or even the critical data. And it's possibly commingled with that critical data. So making sure, we segment, and I'll talk about segmentation as a solution in a minute, but knowing that your network is flat, when a bad actor gets in through your firewall, the lateral movement is hard to contain. And I describe this a little bit later in my slides. Managing the risk to this and having a risk-based approach as to where to segment the network is important for you. But add to that you have a network of other facilities connected to that, and it just draws a conclusion of this expanding network. And this flat network, we call it a crusty outer shell, but a gushy inner belly, that once they crack that crusty shell, they can get to anything. And we need a proactive threat and risk approach to managing when bad actors get in. There's a concept we like to talk about is, are you able to operate while compromised? Anyway, let's keep going. Let's talk about an anatomy of an attack. And what I like about this is I'm not going to talk about how hackers get in, because Scott already talked about that. So I'll just move on to what that attack looks like in pictures. He talked about it beautifully in a series of steps. But basically, the hacker is trying to get to a device or a person within the network and deploy some initial malware on, whether I've stolen your credentials or you didn't patch your system. However I get in through that singular device, I can then talk back to my hacker cloud and deploy additional malware and download that not only to your device, but other devices because of the flat network, and then laterally start to move and attack more devices or compromise more devices, or even gain access to the actual critical payload that I'm looking for to drop my ransomware into your environment. And Scott talked about this too. The idea of this is first encrypt something So all of a sudden you'll get phone calls saying, hey, I can't access this file, or this system stopped, or because the system is encrypted and it needs to be able to talk to, preceding, as you saw the data flows that Dr. Scholl was talking about, there's a data flow of systems, and all of a sudden that flow is disrupted because the middle is encrypted. And while you're trying to figure out what's happening, they begin to try to extort you out of money, or tell you that they stole your data as well as encrypt it. And then, additional disruption if you don't respond to that ransom attack. So what do we need to do to secure, our environment? Is we believe that preserving the operational resilience is the most important thing. And, folks have talked about backups and things like that, and then testing your backups. It's not good enough just to have a backup. So I'll use a quick example. If you have an iPhone and you back up your pictures to the cloud and your phone was compromised, maybe the pictures in the cloud got compromised. So what we would recommend is take a snapshot periodically of those pictures and take it offline, like on a DASD, or not a DASD, a network connected drive, and then disconnect it from the network. Then at least that's not going to get contaminated. That's kind of the idea behind, a backup strategy. So let's talk about those top 4 items. And Dr. Scholl talked about this. We call it an inventory of inventories. If you do not understand the devices that are on your network, and you can't detect if there are rogue devices, CIS top 18, the top 2 things is inventory of your hardware, inventory of your software. So if you don't understand your inventory, that is so foundational to security or risk management. You're lying to yourself to assume that you've managed risk well if you can't truly identify all of the assets or devices on your network. So that's critical to be good at that. Second thing is what I just mentioned, using my iPhone example, is you got to have good backups. Your best recovery option for a ransom attack is having a quality, uncontaminated backup. But the only way you can assure that is periodically take a snapshot of a backup and take it offline and figure out what that interval of time is to do that, whether it's 7 days or a month or whatever. What are you willing to lose if your backups were also contaminated? If it's only 24 hours, then make that air gap every 24 hours. But the idea is have something off the network so it cannot be susceptible to the same ransom attack. We all talked about multi-factor authentication, so I won't spend too much time on that, but the idea is because of that expanding attack surface, because of the multitude of devices in a manufacturing environment, OT, IoT, copiers, phones, etc., you better find out which ones are critical that should have that additional layer of defense, some belts and suspenders in that area. And then the last thing I'll say is, and this isn't an exhaustive list of all the things you need to do to secure, these are just top 4 based on what I presented as threats and the attack surface expansion, is segment your network. High level, take the carpeted floor and segment it from the concrete floor so that, manufacturing equipment and all of its devices are not on the same network as your HR and finance and other end user computing environments. Segment that, then maybe go even further. My idea here is you have a door lock on the outside of your building, but then you have locks on all of the inner doors. Or I use the Titanic scenario, which is, they had baffles in the bottom of the boat to segment, and they thought that if they had a leak or some flood, that baffle would, you'd fill up a portion of the boat. But the problem was there were air ducts so people could breathe throughout the bottom of the boat, and the water spilled over and went into the next one. So it wasn't properly segmented. There were still air gaps in that, but anyhow, segment the network as a great means to at least quarantine when an attack is gonna, will happen, and it's probably gonna happen, at least you can quarantine it because you can batten down the hatches with, firewalls or what have you, so it doesn't sprawl and contaminate the entire network and take you guys out. So that was my quickest spin through of the material. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you anytime offline. However, certainly hit us up on our website, or feel free to go to P2RI, our Pathway to Risk Intelligence platform, and take a self-eval and see where you sit in the journey of securing your environment, and a collaborative approach to supporting you between Cooperative Systems and Felsway Group. We're here to serve. So without further ado, I'll hand it back over to Elizabeth to go ahead and present her financial material.
Yeah, thanks, John. And I will certainly echo John's recommendation on taking advantage of those self-evals and certainly some of the tools that we're providing to you today to again, evaluate your business, evaluate your risk position, and then be able to have some actionable takeaways. So Elizabeth, we'll transition over to you. Elizabeth is from Buckley Technology Group, and she's going to speak to the financial services sector.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Scott. And I have some really great acts to follow. So let me go ahead and get my bearings here, and then we can begin. So once again, thank you to Koopsis and Scott for the opportunity to speak today to our financial services attendees and present an overview of where the state of cybersecurity currently stands, specifically the top 5 threats for financial services in 2022, or as we see it right now. Before we dive in, I do want to share a little bit about Buckley Technology Group and what we do. So we are a compliance service provider for financial institutions nationwide. We provide consulting services and an in-house developed compliance software solution that we call Isaac. So our major areas of focus for financial institutions includes IT audits, cybersecurity testing services, business continuity and disaster recovery planning programs, and outsourced vendor management solutions. So some of the key takeaways that I want to leave you all with is to have an awareness of the biggest cyber threats to financial services, again, as it stands right now, share insights specifically based off of the direct work and results of us performing the IT and cybersecurity audit for our clients, and also provide some quick, simple recommendations to address these top 5 challenges that we're going to go through today. So the first threat or weakness that we come across during our IT audit engagements is a underfunded or lack of cybersecurity budget. So a major factor in creating a cybersecurity culture is to have that buy-in from your board and your management team, and the lack of a properly funded budget we find can present disruptions when trying to put in place unplanned tools and controls that previously were not vetted through. So I do recommend that all institutions, and this could be, not just specific to the financial services sector, but I really do recommend all institutions formalize an IT strategic plan and budget, since cybersecurity really has to be a top-down approach, and that's something that's been mentioned throughout the series today. And also work with industry experts on what IT and cyber tools would really best support your needs and your strategic direction for your business. So you definitely don't want to go through that process blindly. So the second threat to all organizations today is a limited cybersecurity workforce. Specifically, what we have found, again, during our IT and cybersecurity audits for financial institutions is that employees that have been assigned as responsible for these IT programs, they really lack the skills and experience to manage the program. And that's because the role of CISO typically just gets added to them as just another title that they're now responsible for. And this is really, something that we find prevalent within small financial institutions. And so there's also a finding where we do not see continuous training in place to ensure that IT staff can stay on top of emerging controls and tools. So it's clear that the IT departments, if it's in-house, are understaffed, they're unsupported, and they're overwhelmed. So again, backing into creating a solid cybersecurity culture, we do recommend enhancements to talent recruitment. So revisit your job descriptions and make sure that you are clearly aligning responsibilities and the expertise that you need based off of your strategic needs and based off of the cyber challenges that you know you have existing right now and what some of those emerging cyber challenges could be. So we also do recommend that you put in place a training program for your current IT staff to help them grow and evolve. So within your IT budget, add the resources needed for additional staff or even outsourced managed service providers. Excuse me. So if you're not able to, internally handle some of these processes, again, Coopsys is a great managed service provider that works with some mutual financial institutions that Buckley Technology Group also works with. So I would recommend engaging with them to really review some of the tools that you would need if you go down this path of recognizing that, wait a minute, our cybersecurity workforce definitely is limited and we need some help here. So the third threat we find are shortcomings within enterprise information security and cybersecurity awareness training. So training programs are mostly limited to employees only, which is something that we find really within 9 out of 10 of the institutions that we work with. So we really do recommend extending training to all of your key stakeholders, including your board members, and providing awareness materials as well to your customers so that they can also secure their access into some of your critical services that you perform. So what we also find is that most institutions will focus on the type of threat or cyber attack that is being highly covered and discussed within news and by the press. So most recently, this would be ransomware. That's within the past, I would say 2 years, 3 years, it's been all over the news. We hear about different organizations and entities that have been compromised by a ransomware attack, which again is a very critical threat to mitigate, but institutions really shouldn't have tunnel vision within their cybersecurity programs. And that's something that we see. They will focus really on what they think is the #1 threat, and everything else kind of gets pushed to the side. So phishing was actually the primary threat and was used to gain access in 46% of attacks against the financial services sector in 2021. So what we would like to see for risk mitigation strategies is that the focus on the threats are most relevant to your business. So we definitely recommend going through and performing threat risk assessments to sort of classify what threats would have the most impact to your credit union, what threats are the most likely to impact your credit union, and then based off of that, you then start putting controls in place. Also, ensure your social engineering testing does go beyond email test. So you want to include phone testing as well, site or office visits to measure how your employees will respond to various forms of phishing attacks, especially since this is the most prevalent type of attack for financial services today. So we also do want to address inadequate controls in place over supply chain management. And so this is something that as well was covered in the different sessions this morning. But in general, your third parties and vendors can be a weak link in your cybersecurity program. The perfect example of that would be the SolarWinds attack that did spread externally to their clients. So during our audits, we find either a lack of or inconsistent vendor risk assessment and vendor monitoring process. which is, definitely a major problem, especially since the regulators, the FDIC, the NCUA, OCC, CFPB, they are emphasizing supply chain management and cyber resilience in recovering from a third-party attack. So this is not something that's going to go away. It's only something that they're going to continue to dive in when they come on site to do their exams. So what do you need to do? Definitely formalize your vendor management program. Make sure your risk assessments are consistent and that your due diligence reviews and monitoring of your vendors include documents such as SOC reports, results of independent testing reports, just to get the assurance that your vendors do have appropriate controls in place. Also, one of our biggest recommendations is to include your critical vendors within your disaster recovery test and include them within your incident response scenarios, so that you can measure and assess, how your institution will be impacted should your vendor services become unavailable, and also how your institution would have to recover and respond to that type of disaster event or cyber attack that, is ends up at, being at your primary vendors or your third-party vendor, but it does impact your operations, your business services. And kind of leaves your customers waiting for your response. So our fifth and final biggest threat to financial services is that there is a false sense of security. So Deloitte identified this as one of the three key findings in their financial cybersecurity survey. So we initially find that many of the institutions that we work with will self-assess themselves as having a high level of cyber maturity. But again, we find that their controls have never been tested. So it's kind of like that mindset of we think we have these things in place versus we know we have these in place and they work as they should. The clients that we work with, they also express, satisfaction in their current controls and in their current programs. But then again, we find that there are no processes in place to evolve those controls with the emerging threats and with what we expect to come in the very near future as cyber attacks continue to increase and grow. So something to keep in mind is that we, all of our businesses, all of our institutions, we periodically will have fire drills every so often, but the likelihood of a cyber attack compared to your office burning down is definitely greater. So we want to recommend that institutions start running cyber attack drills and testing. So if you have not performed an independent IT audit, if you have not performed a cyber incident response test in the last 12 months, I definitely would recommend that you do so sooner rather than later, especially because that gives you a real idea of how secure you really are. Also, make sure that your disaster recovery and incident response test includes all areas and all departments of the business. Don't just focus on IT recovery, since it's, it is definitely important. That's the backbone of recovering and restoring operations. However, it is important to measure how other business processes and how other departments and functions will also be impacted by a cyber attack. And lastly, and most importantly, make sure you put in place plans to address any of the gaps and weaknesses that are identified as a result of the IT audit and disaster recovery testing. So I know that was very quick and that was a lot of information to take in, but I will leave you all on this one final note. The average cost of a cybercrime for financial services is 40% higher than all other sectors. So again, I cannot stress enough how important it is to take in the information shared with you during all of these incredible sessions and take it and move forward, go back to your businesses and to your management teams and really enhance your cybersecurity culture and also your IT and cybersecurity programs within your own businesses. So again, thank you for the time and for the opportunity to share some of the insights with you from our perspective of doing IT audits and cybersecurity audits for financial services and financial institutions. My contact information is available should anyone wish to discuss some of these threats or recommendations a little bit further, or even if you want to explore some of the services that Buckley Technology Group offers, you're more than welcome to contact me directly or visit our site for more info. But again, thank you all. And Scott, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Also, again, some great insight here. And I will echo Elizabeth's closing remarks on bringing all this information back to your leadership teams and talking about it and talking about ways in which you can implement some of these strategies that we've covered here. So, as you've seen in all these speaker presentations today, there's a lot to consider in terms of your overall preparedness. But the good news is that there's many experts and professionals ready and willing to assist you in that journey of risk reduction, if you will. So we're certainly highly recommending that you use today's content, some of the tools that we provided to you, and use that information, those tools to think about and evaluate your business's risks. And then once you take the time to do the evaluation, really, engage the professionals. Don't try to do this all on your own. As you've seen, there's so much to consider. There's so many details, so much expertise required to really properly craft and implement these strategies in your businesses. And you most likely don't have the time or the expertise to go about this yourself, as Elizabeth just mentioned. So we collectively, with all the presenters here today, we're here to help. So certainly reach out to us. And with that said, we will start our Q&A session, our Q&A panel. So we have some questions that were already submitted. If you have any others, please submit them. And we're going to have all of our presenters here available to answer questions from you all. So I'll start it off with, let's see, first one that's come in. This looks like it's a good question for Scott Garcia. Can you speak about sanction lists when insurance will or will not pay for the ransom claim?
Great question, and very interesting as well. Obviously, the Treasury has put out a notice saying that they do not encourage us to pay ransom, or do not encourage insurance carriers to pay the ransom, as it encourages more ransomware, or it's perpetual. We know that we're not allowed to pay anybody that's on the terrorist list. So if you're on the terrorist list, we just can't pay those types of ransoms. Fortunately, most of these ransomware claims do not come from the terrorist list. You'll find carriers have ways of paying the ransom as well. We're considered a financial institution, therefore we're not allowed to pay ransoms, but the way that they get around it is they pay on behalf of, and they don't pay directly onto it. You'll find carriers will write their forms in two different ways. One is a reimbursement form where you pay the ransom and they reimburse you for it, or the second one is they pay on behalf of. But as this exposure goes, what we found is that we do have to pay a lot of these ransoms. The business interruption can be very impactful, so we can't waste time of not paying the ransom in a lot of cases. And it also comes down to the business's risk tolerance to it as well. The San Francisco Transit Authority got hit. They refused to pay the ransom, and they were down for, 2 weeks, I think. So a lot of it comes down to principle of the matter as well. But we are paying these ransoms when we can. And that's why it's important to get the FBI engaged into these. They do have a lot of the encryption keys that, we don't have to pay the ransom in certain cases, and we can just utilize the encryption keys known on file. Long answer to a short question, but I hope that answered it.
Great, thanks, Scott. Next question here looks like maybe Elizabeth, you'd be a good candidate to answer this one. How often should I update my written information security policy?
So best practices and actually regulatory requirements state that the written information security policy should be reviewed and updated at least annually, as well as board approved once it is updated. However, again, we want to enhance your cybersecurity culture. So we will actually recommend that the policies are updated as soon as there's network infrastructure changes, as soon as you have new tools and controls that are put in place, because that really should be a living and breathing document that guides your enterprise essentially. So, so short answer for regulatory requirements, definitely at least annually for review and board approval. However, if you want to enhance your programs, take it one step further and be proactive, please go ahead and update it as often as changes occur.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. Next question here is related to risk assessments. So maybe John or Todd, you could take this one. How much does it cost, or how much should I budget for performing a risk assessment of my business?
You want to take that, Todd?
I was going to say, John, go ahead, because your formula may be different than ours.
Sure. You should budget. It's a good question. It depends on the size of your environment. So if you have, 100 workstations or 10,000 workstations, obviously the budget would be different. I would say a risk assessment. So if you are doing penetration tests of your environment, it's probably a similar size expense as a pen test for that environment. So if it's $5,000 to pen test your small environment, or 30 grand to pen test your large environment, your risk assessment would be similar in size. So sorry, it's a dodging of the budget question, but I think it aligns with the sizing of a penetration test.
Yeah, I'll echo to the extent we're a compliance company. So to the extent of us getting into the depth of the penetration side, we're a little bit more cost effective, but our focus is going to be healthcare. And we're working really in conjunction with the groups to assure that they're going to be in compliance for the Hipaa regs along the facets of more of the administrative side and the policy side. We work in conjunction with who their IT group is to ensure that we're probing them to make sure that they're doing the right things in regards to securing their organizations.
Right. Okay, great. Thanks, guys. Next one is another, or not another, but an insurance question. Are you, so Scott, you can answer this one. Are you seeing area businesses choosing not to insure themselves due to some of the requirements as well as the limitations within the current cyber liability policies?
Yeah, self-insurance is, or self-insured is always an option, of course, with any type of insurance product. We don't see many companies self-insure. Reason being is you get a lot for your money. So a small business could be paying $2,000 for their cyber insurance and getting $1 million worth of coverage. I mean, $2,000 for $1 million worth of coverage is well worth the investment. But the second part of that question, where the difficulty to obtain coverage due to proper controls being in place, there are, and that's one of the advantages of the InsurTechs that popped up, is they give you access to a lot of the controls that they are requiring, either at discounted prices, or we're starting to even see insurance companies give you those tools. We have one insurance provider right now that provides the endpoint solution with their insurance policy. Obviously, it helps both parties involved, and they stand behind it, knowing that that is going to be a large contributor to preventing the breach to it as well. So if you work with the proper insurance carrier, you may be able to find the solution that's right for you, because they'll help you implement those controls.
Okay, thank you. Next question here again is around some of the policy subject matter. So maybe again, John or Todd, I don't have any written policies in place. Where do you recommend I start?
Yeah, I could try that first, Todd, because it'll be broader, and then maybe you could talk about the healthcare version of that. Felsway Group recommends what we call our Fab 5 set of policies. First of all, we would look at your employee handbook, see what you are referencing as it relates to security, and pull that out because of the frequency that Elizabeth talked about of refreshing your security policies. You don't change your employee handbook and employee policies very often, maybe every 3 to 5 years. So we recommend an overarching written information security policy that talks to multiple areas that you are managing, but then we would have subsequent sub-policies for information handling, mobile devices, passwords and access, and then what's our fifth one? It's probably crisis management, incident response, things like that. So anyway, 5, we call them the Fab 5. Mobile device management, information handling, password or access management, and then probably some data protection, data backup, things like that. And then an overarching written information security policy. Why do some companies will have us mush that all together as one policy. So it's easier to manage a single document. But then if you wanted to edit one section within one version of that sub policy, you're basically pushing out another larger document. So we kind of right size it and align it, but it should categorically have at least those things within the policy. I hope that helped.
On the healthcare side, because the healthcare high-tech, the Hipaa High-Tech Act is part of the Federal Register, it's very specific. So the breakdown of the policies and procedures is much, much better known in regards to the language, and lots of that will follow the direct language that comes from the actual Federal Register itself. There are areas, as I had mentioned in my discussion, that you have to be specific as it relates to your workflows in your organization. And those can be from how you're giving information to patients all the way down to how you're disposing of your systems. And those really, and when you're in a situation where you're having to show that documentation to any regulatory body, it does need to be specific to your organization. So it brings it right down to the brass tacks of what happens on a day-to-day basis in your organization.
Yeah, and Scott, just to jump in for the financial services side. So, for the question of, I don't really have any written policies right now, kind of where do I start? We do see a lot of financial institutions, put in place different templates, generic templates that they found, and sort of echoing, Todd's statement as well, is that these policies really do need to be specific to your financial institution. So while the policy templates may be based off of the regulations and the regulatory guidance, it is not going to meet the examiner's expectations because you really need to make it yours.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you, all three of you. Next question is educational related. So Fred, this goes to you. My son is looking to pursue a career in cybersecurity. Where do you recommend starting the information gathering process?
So I'll assume he would be in high school. I would think that at Quinnipiac, we offer cybersecurity summer camps, and I'm pretty sure there are other schools in the area that do. So I would suggest getting involved with one of those, going to the camp. I think they're pretty exciting. There's another program called the Cyber Patriot program, which is a national program for high school students and middle school students. So research that and get involved with that, and drop me an email for more details.
Excellent. All right, that is all of the questions that we had submitted. Certainly anything else, feel free to submit it now. So I just want to wrap up here. Certainly want to thank all of the presenters today. You've all presented some really great, valuable information here for our attendees, and we thank you for your participation today. As I mentioned, our next event is going to be on December 8th, and it'll be a little bit more solution oriented. So now that we've presented the information we have between June's event and today's event on just what's going on in the world, what things you should be aware of, some of the industry specific content, we want to give you some more solution-based content that you can immediately implement. Not that you can't immediately implement some of the things that we've already talked about today, but certainly use some of the tools that we've presented to you, the SWOT analysis framework, the assessment tool, and reach out to any of the presenters today for help in your journey here. They've all put their contact information on the screen, on the slides, but if you missed it, certainly feel free to reach out to us and we can get you in touch with them as needed. They're all here to help, and they all have great expertise in their respective industries. So this is not an easy task to go down the road of in any of your businesses. Want to thank all of the attendees for joining today. And again, your feedback is very important. I know we just posted in the chat panel the link to the survey, if you could fill that out. And once you fill out that survey, we will certainly get you the DoorDash gift card to have lunch on us in appreciation for your attendance today. So with that being said, I'll wrap it up, and we'll look forward to seeing you all at December 8th event. And if there's anything between now and then that you need assistance with, please reach out, and we will get you in touch with the right individual. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, presenters, and take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.